It's 9 o'clock, and I'd like to call our meeting to order. Welcome to our October Committee of the Whole meeting. It's great to see everyone here. Thank you for your presence. Our first matter of business is approval of the consent calendar. Are there any corrections to the minutes posted on our Committee of the Whole session?
A motion to approve the minutes as presented.
We have a motion from Linda Leventis Wells. We have a second from Angie Mosley. It is moved and seconded to approve the minutes. Any discussion? There's no discussion, so all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes have it and the motion carries. Our second item of business is the appearance of visitors. We have 2 speakers today. At this time, I would like to ask our Vice Chair, Ms. Debbie Bush, to read the guidelines for public comment.
Thank you. As each speaker's name is called, he or she should proceed to the podium at the end of the dais where there is a microphone and a light system. Each speaker has up to 3 minutes to speak to the board. The light system will begin green for the first 2 minutes and will turn yellow when 1 minute remains on the speaker's allotted time. In keeping with board policy KCA, abusive language or personal attacks aimed at students or staff members will not be permitted. All speakers are expected to behave in an orderly and respectful manner. The board will not engage in discussion with the speaker or respond to the comments. The superintendent will designate a member of the staff to respond to each speaker in an appropriate and timely manner. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bush. Our first speaker is Woody Tanner.
Good morning. My name is Mr. Tanner Woody, and I have been an English teacher at Lakeview Middle School for 2 years. This year, Lakeview has received an unusual amount of district involvement as Greenville County Schools has decided to make this school their project in order to raise standardized test scores and improve their ranking in South Carolina. On Thursday, Dr. David McDonald and Dr. George Ward and their colleagues presented the Elevate initiative to Lakeview that they believe will increase test scores. The initiative weighs heavily on teachers' performances and not the needs of the kids. Even though there is an entire school of highly qualified personnel currently in place, all staff that deals directly with the instruction will be forced to reapply and re-interview for their positions. Those who are selected to stay at Lakeview will be rewarded with a hefty bonus that can total up to an extra $12,000 a year. The teachers are not the problem at Lakeview. The problem is that Lakeview is viewed as a bad school with bad kids. According to data released by the National Center of Educational Statistics, it was announced that, quote, 87% of public schools reported that COVID-19 has negatively impacted student socio-emotional development during the 2021-2022 school year, end quote. This is no surprise to teachers in the classroom. Our principal, Dr. Nicole Puza, has asked for behavior interventionists, extra administrators, extra school counselors, and everything in between, and we have always been met with, we do not have the money. When addressed with these concerns last Thursday, Dr. McDonald and Dr. Ward and other district personnel ignored the questions and abruptly ended the meeting. If this initiative passes, Lakeview will go from having teachers who show up every day for the kids to teachers who show up for the money. With this initiative, we are investing money in controlling teachers rather than supporting them. The bonuses are not going to change our demographics or our test scores, but it will continue to whitewash and monetize our school. Today, I'm calling on the board to acknowledge that minority kids and kids in poverty at Lakeview deserve the same effort, support, and sustenance that other schools receive, and this starts by investing money into the school as it is, not with a chop-shop, piece-together initiative that removes caring teachers from the building. I'm going to end my time with a quote by mental health therapist Wendy Jade. An environment that is not safe to disagree is not an environment focused on growth. It is an environment focused on control. Stop with the control and start with the support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Woody. Our next speaker is Sarah Frick.
My name is Sarah Frick. I'm a professor of mathematics at Furman University. I have 3 children at Sterling School. I am a new member of our School Improvement Council and a member of the Material Review Committee pool for this district. In late August, the 7th grade ELA teacher had a banned books assignment pulled after someone complained at the district level. I have many concerns about how this all unfolded. I've gone back and forth about policy versus process versus guidelines. However, what is most concerning is that there never should have been any investigation by the district at all. Board Policy Rules IFA plainly states that parents should first request an alternative assignment. This was never done. No official challenge was made, and yet the assignment was pulled. Whatever the truth may be, the optics are certainly that someone or someones in district leadership is weaponizing the interpretation of policy in order to circumvent the safeguards put in place by the district to combat censorship. I urge the board not to bend to complaints without following official board policy. The Sterling leadership team was reluctant to allow adjustments to be made to the assignment to bring it into compliance with the process because they knew that new guidelines for assignments related to Freedom to Read Week were on the way. These guidelines, as have been communicated to me verbally, require any Freedom to Read assignment to be fully contained within the 5-day week. While this guideline doesn't explicitly state that a teacher cannot assign a full-length novel, the time restraint makes it virtually impossible to do so. An 8th grade ELA teacher at Sterling had to pull her Freedom to Read assignment. I have been told that these guidelines, which are not board policy, are there to protect the teachers. In reality, these guidelines have resulted in multiple assignments being pulled. That is not protection. They put obstacles in the way of teachers so that the result is teacher self-censorship. If guidelines are being treated as policy, then I urge the board to make them readily available in writing to all parents. The teachers at Sterling are definitely blue ribbon quality teachers. I am so grateful for what they do for my kids every single day. Protect teachers' autonomy, protect their academic freedom, treat them as the professionals that they are. If we want to keep and attract quality teachers, present them with a quality job. If a parent doesn't think an assignment is appropriate for their child, there are existing policies to handle that. Insist that they be followed so they are making decisions for their child and I for mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Frick. Our third item of business is instruction. Ms. Leventis Wells will serve as the chair. Ms. Leventis Wells, I will turn this section over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. We will address 3.01 innovative course approvals. Dr. Royster.
Thank you, Ms. Leventis Wells. I'll turn this over to Mr. McCoy for the innovative course presentation and requested approvals.
Thank you, Dr. Royster. So no presentation. This is just, again, a continuation. Just to remind you, we approve innovative courses every October and February. The innovative courses that you have on your list for the most part are honors courses based off the state rubric, adding honors courses based on the state rubric. And then we did add the personal finance. If you'll remember, the personal finance course was put in place by the State Department last year. This is our first year of the CP level, so we reviewed that as well to make that an honors level course. That you'll see there is personal finance honors 1/2 unit, and then at the top there you also see that we did create for those students who want to take a advanced personal finance. Basically what that means is it's a 1-hour course. Some students' schedule is better fitted for a 1-hour course than a 1/2 credit. So students have the option of taking a 1-credit personal finance course, which is above the state requirement, or they can meet the state requirement with a 1/2 credit personal finance CP course or honors course now.
Ms. Mosley.
Thank you, Ms. Wells. Jeff, I have just a clarification. Yep. Is the new requirement, that 1/2 credit, is that being included in the economics?
It is not.
Because Okay,
It is, there was discussion about that at the very beginning, when it first was proposed, but it is not. So economics and government is still a requirement.
Right.
Half and half, and then this is a additional half on top of, they reduced the 7 elective credits to 6.5 basically, and added the half credit personal finance.
so it's a separate class?
Yes. Not, and it does apply, it only applies to the incoming freshman class. It's not retroactive to the previous courses. So
Okay.
seniors are fine, juniors are fine.
Okay. My daughter's in econ and government, and it was referred to as personal finance, and
So there is a component, there's always been a component prior to this legislative action. Previously, there was a personal finance component requirement in economics. They wanted from what I understand from legislature, they wanted a full half credit devoted just to personal finance.
okay, I just need a clarification on that, thank you.
Any other questions? I would entertain a motion.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please address by saying aye. All opposed? And the motion carries. 3.02, Instructional Material Review Committee, pool members. Dr. Royster.
Thank you, Ms. Levinas Wells. Just as a reminder, each year we solicit for individuals who have an interest in serving on the Materials Review Committee. That committee its membership is established by board policy. Each person who selects to volunteer for service on that committee serves a 3-year term, with the exception of the students, and they're selected, excuse me, annually. Now, you serve a 3-year term unless you were to move off of your status by which you were appointed. For example, if you were appointed as a parent 2 years ago, but your child graduated this past year, you would no longer be eligible to serve as a parent. But we also want to add to it each year so that the terms of all the members do not end coincidentally with all the other members. And so that we have a pool of people from which to draw each time a committee may need to be held. So this ensures that we keep a supply of individuals who are willing to serve, that they represent the categories required by board policy, and that so that the terms don't all expire at one time. The only reason that any name would not have been brought forward to you for inclusion would be if they had failed to meet the requirements for the position to which they were applying. For example, they said they were a parent and it turned out they were not a parent of a student in the system. So there was no judgment exercised as to the qualifications or qualities of the individual, other than do they in fact represent the constituency that we have them mark a box, for lack of a better term, who they are representing. And I believe they were offered a primary selection and perhaps a secondary one. They could not select more than 2. Dr. McDavid, is that correct?
Yes, sir. They were selecting all that were eligible. However, they're selected for their primary on the list that you have and are available for their secondary should that be necessary.
Dr. McDavid can answer any questions that you all might have about any specifics of the process.
Are there any questions? Okay. Mr. Cochran?
Thank you. How often does the Instructional Material Review Committee meet on average?
Thank you, Mr. Cochran. Per our board policy, if there is a challenge, a formal challenge that reaches the district level, meaning that the school was not able to resolve it with an alternative assignment, then the committee meets to resolve that conflict. In the year 2022-23, we did not have a challenge that elevated to that level. In the prior year, we had one challenge, which the board then reviewed And then in the year prior to, we had one person to challenge 4 books. So that varies depending on the assignments that are given and that the parents have opportunities to resolve those earlier.
How many people from the list, if there is a challenge, how many people from the list would then be chosen to serve?
Thank you. Our committees are comprised based on elementary, middle, or high, and you will see in the board policy how many from each category are selected to serve. Essentially, we have members of, should I get it right? We would have on the elementary committee, for example, parents, students, and teachers, community members. And at the high school level, we would add our students to that process.
And when a challenge comes up, how are the people actually chosen off the list to be on that particular committee?
As you see on the list, we have elementary, middle, or high. So a parent of an elementary student would be eligible for an elementary challenge, middle, or high, relatively. And when we have the list that is our current pool, we verify eligibility, i.e. the parents are still actually parents in the system. From those eligible pools, we will work with our data quality system to randomize and select the members who are available to serve. One of the things that we will set in advance is the meeting, and we will verify that the person is eligible, able to attend the meeting, and willing to read the book in advance of the meeting so that they can have the conversation. That is always done by a telephone call to tell them that they have been called to duty, and if they're not able to serve, we go to the next person on the randomized list.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cochran.
That's all, Ms. Leventis-Wells. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Michelle, Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell.
Thank you, Ms. Leventis-Wells.
Yes, ma'am. My apologies.
Dr. McDavid, what's the application process for this? Do they go on to online and fill out an application to be on this committee, or how are they chosen?
They were able to, in August, submit from our online process. We also gave them the opportunity to submit. One person, in fact, did email his survey or responses in, and we entered those in, so they can apply. It is an online process through a survey so that we collect everyone, but they can also apply in writing. They can mail or email the responses to us to be included.
I know Dr. Royster said that they say who they're representing.
Yes, ma'am.
What is that? It means what board member they're representing, or what area, or how does that work?
They let us know if they are a teacher, a parent, a community member. They let us know which areas they are eligible for. So a parent may list parent and also community, which is a non-school district employee. That parent and or community member is then eligible. For the time that they are a parent, we keep them on, and that is their primary, to be a parent representative, but that is all they select. They do not enter the area of the board they represent. They do enter their address, which we verify is in our Greenville County Schools attendance zone.
Or how often do y'all check the list to make sure that they are what they say they are on the application?
For the verification purpose, before this meeting, we verify that. If there is a challenge before anyone would be called to serve or selected random in the randomization process, we would verify their eligibility at that time.
Thank you, Ms. Leventis-Wells.
Thank you so much, Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell. At this time, I would ask Mrs. Middleton.
Thank you. Thank you. So if I understand correctly, there is no routine meetings of these parents and instructors other than if there's a challenge to a book?
That is correct, per board policy KNBA.
So how do we determine, or who determines, if there is a problem with the book? I'm trying to understand, do the books all come out and then everybody reads them and says, someone says, I don't like this book, and then it's challenged, or how does that work?
We have procedures in place and instruction under board policy and rule IFA for classroom library text, for media center text, and for textbooks or text assigned for instruction. So we have those in place, and our professional staff, the teachers, the principals in the buildings, make those decisions and supports every day. Within our schools, we have committees that help to review books as they're entered into the classroom libraries or selected to be placed on a syllabus for a full novel read. That is under policy IFA and rule IFA, that we have those reviews happening on an ongoing basis.
So if a parent decides that a book, they want to challenge a book, would they then challenge the book, and then this committee would form to talk about it? Or would they say, well, I don't want my kid to read that book, so then it's not a challenge?
We have the alternate assignment that a parent, there's a form that the parent is able to submit to the teacher, letting the teacher know, I would not like my child to participate in this assignment or read this book. There, in that place, the teacher provides an alternate assignment. So parents are able to choose the assignments their students, or the books their students are reading in the assignments.
So in that case, then there would not be a challenge?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Brett?
Thank you, Ms. Levin-Wells. How many people actually applied this last go-around that we had in August?
In the last go-around, we had 74 to apply.
Or how many positions?
We have an unlimited number of positions. They go into the pool to be selected should there be a challenge to a book.
Okay, so are all of the people that applied then, are they on this list?
All of those who are eligible are on the list. We removed, there were 4 who were already on the 2022-25 list, and you have to wait 1 year between exiting before you can reapply. That is a standard procedure. It's written into the policy, but all of the others were vetted. There was one who lived in Spartanburg, District 7, who was not eligible, so we communicated with everyone who was not eligible, but everyone else, yes ma'am, was submitted.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Dr. McDavie, I have a question for you. I'm looking at, there were only 2. Do you take a member from each category, such as clergy, community member, specialist, parent, etc., teacher? What is the committee made up of?
So for a complaint at the elementary level, when we call the committee to serve, we will take 3 parents, each of whom must have a child currently enrolled in a district elementary school. There will be 4 district elementary school teachers, each of whom shall teach at a different grade level, and there will be 1 elementary school specialist. There are similar makeups for the middle, and then at the high school, there is the 2 teachers. Now, in addition to those members, each committee will include as full members 1 member of the clergy and 2 other persons who are not employees of the district. So when we post the information, anyone can apply for the pool, and if there is a challenge, we would call a committee that would be comprised of the numbers that are specifically designated in board policy KMBA.
Okay, and how many would that be?
It depends on the level. So elementary, that would be 3 parents, 4 teachers, 1 district elementary specialist, the district language arts coordinator, I would be there as an advisor, and the 2 committee members, and the 2 clergy, 2 community members and 2 clergy.
And if you have multiple reviews, are these people go back into the pot and you use new ones? Or are you going to use the same committee for those?
In one event where we had the 4 books challenged by 1 member, we used the same committee for, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
May we extend for 3 minutes, please, without objection? Thank you. Okay? Thank you.
I think I'm unplugged, just a moment. Thank you. In the event that we receive multiple, we would meet with our district council in order to be advised on how to run multiples at one time. In the past, we had one parent to challenge 4 books and an assignment list. We met and determined that we should keep the same committee over the course of 4 different sessions. We read each book independently, reviewed each book independently, and at the end of that series, which took place over the summer and in the early fall, we brought all 4 of those responses to the district board for approval. The committee met consistently throughout that series, but in any event, if there are multiples, we would need to consult with council on how to do that. Otherwise, when a committee is formed, that committee will be formed for that one challenge, and after that challenge is reviewed, we would go back to the pool, which is why we have a pool, to get different members for each review. But there are standing, again, there are standing members on the committee.
Is there, if you have the 4 readings that are challenged and you use those same committee members, and then later on you have another challenge, is there a possibility that those members will also be used again?
In the randomized selection process,
yes,
we would, currently we have enough people in the pool to find different people, but that would be something we look at in our rules for randomization and selection.
Okay, because if we have all these people, I would like for them to be utilized instead of just be in name only. So, okay, thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve and appoint the 2023 to 2026 Instructional Material Review Committee pool.
Second. Second by Ms. Mosley. Any questions? All those in favor, please address by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. The motion carries, and we will continue to 3.03. South Carolina School Board Association delegates. Let's see. The recommended motion to certify the slate of delegates with each trustee named as both a delegate and an alternate, and with the chair assigned 3 votes and the remaining trustees 2 votes. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I would entertain a, thank you, Ms. Bush.
Yes, I would like to certify.
Yeah,
it's on.
okay.
It's on.
For some reason, I can't hear. Is it just me down at this end?
It is a little hard to hear.
Okay, go ahead.
To certify the state of delegates with each trustee named as both a delegate and an alternate, and with the chair assigned 3 votes and the remaining trustees 2 votes each.
Second by Ms. Glenda Morrison-Fair. Any discussion? All those in favor, please address by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And the motion carries. I will turn it back over to Madam Chair Stiles. Dr. Stiles.
Thank you, Ms. LaVentus Wells. Our next matter of business is administration, and Ms. Doolin will serve as the chair of the administration section. Ms. Doolin, I will turn the table to you at this time.
Thank you. Item 4.01 is the revision of board policy IDBA, Gavin's Law. Dr. Royster, did you want to speak to this?
Thank you, Ms. Doolin. Just briefly, this is a recommended change in policy based on the requirements passed in statute this past year by the General Assembly. Mr. Webb crafted that policy. I'm sure he'll be glad to entertain any specific question that you might have about it. I think it pretty well just mirrors the statutory requirements.
Yeah, that is correct. Late in the legislative session, the General Assembly included in law a provision for school boards to adopt, as a mandatory adoption, of a policy dealing with Gavin's Law, which deals with sexual extortion. And the South Carolina Department of Ed and Technical Support has recommended that policy and any curriculum design would mirror Aaron's Law. Aaron's Law is regarding sexual abuse that has been incorporated over the last 6-7 years, also in accordance with state law. And so this policy, the revision, sort of piggybacks on Aaron's Law, that reference in Board Policy IDBA, and creates a paragraph regarding Gavin's Law, which, again, as Dr. Royster said, mirrors state law.
All right, thanks for drafting that. Does anyone have any questions? Mr. Cochran?
I noticed in there as part of the new revision, of course, it mentions age-appropriate instruction with this. What grade level does that begin with here in Greenville County?
And academics can weigh in more. I believe it's across the board in elementary, middle, and high. Obviously, it's going to look different for elementary than it would in middle school and high school, but that is a consistent statutory requirement, that age-appropriate instruction. And Department of Education often gives technical guidance on that. And I know academics is focused on what is age appropriate as well for all levels, but it is across the board.
So with, I guess, basically the topic being sextortion, basically, what, and I guess this might be more for academics, but what would, with that in mind, what would age-appropriate instruction look like in our kindergarten classes, for instance?
So Ms. Bell leads that division in health ed, and she has committees that work through that, as well as Mr. Webb indicated, the State Department does provide some materials and guidance as far as what is appropriate by age level and grade range for K through 12.
So certainly nothing explicit, in kindergarten level, and it would be sort of, toned down, absolutely, at that age range.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Doolin, that's all.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, I need to make her the
Madam
motion.
Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the revision to Board Policy IDBA as presented.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item 4.02 is the employee incentive model. Dr. Royster, do you want to speak to this first?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Dillon. We have for a number of years tried various programs and various approaches to increase academic attainment at our schools that have struggled the most with that. And about 3 years ago, we began to look at the possibility of incentivizing teachers to teach at those schools that have had the greatest struggle, and to accord some financial reward for improved academic attainment in those schools. As I said, we began more than 3 years ago collecting data, looking at various programs that have been implemented throughout the country. In fact, a number of years ago, within Greenville County, we had some incentivization based on teacher goal setting, and we had some financial incentives provided for teachers to choose to teach at some of our schools that were struggling the greatest with student performance in the core subject areas only. We discontinued those after several years. They had not made the impact that it had been hoped they would make. So that goes back to probably early, mid-2000s. There have been TAP programs, you all may have heard reference to that term before, that have operated in school districts throughout the state of South Carolina to incentivize student performance through the bonus recognition of teachers in those subject areas. One of the things that was consistent throughout those programs and the ones that we looked at nationally, and Mr. McCoy and Dr. McCrary had EAB, which provides research for us on occasion, basically do a meta study, in other words, gathering data from multiple research projects of implementation of similar programs throughout the country. And we took that information and over the last 2 years have crafted together a pilot program that basically took into account all the shortcomings that we found in the programs that are included in that research. The primary shortcomings that we determined is most of those programs that didn't evidence a gain in student achievement had one or more of the following factors in common. One, it pitted teacher against teacher. Or it only rewarded those teachers who taught a tested subject area. And or it did not provide any recognition for the contribution of all employees to the effort of increased performance. So we put together this pilot that attempts to address every one of the shortcomings that we identified through that research to develop both a plan that pays for performance based on student achievement and also recognizes that for some of our schools, it is extremely difficult for them to attract experienced teachers. For example, we're now at about a 70% hire rate. When we hire new teachers each year, we're at about a 70% hire rate for experienced teachers. So for every 100 teachers we're hiring each year, 70 of them are experienced. Some of our schools that struggle the most with student achievement, you heard earlier this morning from a faculty member at Lakeview, theirs is 50%. Their ability to hire experienced new teachers. Also, our schools that are having the greatest challenge with achievement often have the most difficult time retaining teachers. So this model that we put together, that we are proposing as a pilot, recognizes with $5,000 the hiring to go to one of the two schools that we have identified as being in the pilot program. So if you are a certified employee and you work in one of those two schools, full or part-time, you would receive a base of $5,000 above where you are paid on the teacher salary schedule. Now, if you're half-time, it would be 0.5 that amount. Or a quarter time, we have itinerant personnel that might serve that school a quarter time. Those details are in here. What we do know is that the single greatest factor over which we have control at a school level over student achievement is a quality teacher in the classroom. Just like we know at the district level, the single greatest factor over which we have control is a quality principal leading that school. None of that is to say there are not quality personnel in either of those schools. There are. There's a caveat in there, though, that requires all the personnel that are certified to reapply for two reasons. One reason being we only want people there that believe in this idea and this concept and want to be a part of it. Secondly, while anecdotally, I think a number of people could tell you, well, these are good teachers here. That's not an equitable way to do things. So by making each certified employee go through a same process, then we can identify those to stay equitably. And anyone applying from the outside would go through a similar process. Now, obviously, we know more about people within that school and within our district than we would know about people from outside the district. But they too would go through a similar process. The idea being to do those things that we believe will enable us to most leverage the single biggest factor in improving student attainment, and that's ensuring the most quality experienced teachers in the classroom we can possibly ensure. We've tried multiple programs in those schools to a point that was made earlier today. They, in fact, do have additional personnel. Lakeview, for example, has 12 employees more, including one more assistant principal than a middle school of similar size in the district. The same would be true proportionally for Alexander. Not 12, but a proportional number. Alexander's a smaller school. Those two schools that we identified are our two that have unfortunately struggled the most. Lakeview had the lowest academic performance of all the middle schools in the district since 2016. And we don't simply compare these schools to other schools in the district. We compare them to similar schools in the district and in the state, i.e. those that possess a similar set of demographics. Alexander, in that same period of time, except for the 2 years our academics team was directly in that school on a daily basis, experienced the same level of student achievement. So in looking at our student achievement, we believed that the place that best serves the study of whether or not a program such as this is effective would be those two schools. Coming out of that, we proposed to do it for 4 years because 4 years gives us 3 years of data. As you know, test score data we don't get back till the fall. So if we do it for 4 years, it gives us 3 years of a data set. At the end of that 3 years, be able to determine, is that something we should continue to do? Maybe we shouldn't continue to do it. Or, if it's been effective, then how should we advance that to our other low-performing schools? Or advance it to all Title I schools, some of which are not low-performing, but may also struggle to attract quality teachers to a degree. Or maybe they're non-Title I schools. Or the bonus aspect, not the base pay, but the bonus aspect may be worth considering implement at all schools. But we would have a data set of 3 years with our most academically challenged populations, for which we're providing all kinds of other supports. I mentioned the additional personnel. They're served by the on-track program, which provides additional supports in there for all the other issues, many of which we have no control, but we try to mitigate those circumstances. But teacher quality and the retention of quality teachers is something over which we have some degree of control. And this pilot proposes to determine whether or not financial incentivization to get those teachers there and to keep the teachers there that are performing well with those students is in fact a remedy that will allow them to be competitive, not just with similar populations. What we presented to you today has had considerable study, change, and revision, not only from district staff, but with input from groups of principals and teacher groups. Not specifically from a particular school, but a representative cross-section from throughout the district. Did not make a final determination on the 2 schools until the past year. But it has had input from those that are the practitioners on a daily basis, from our academics people that are in those schools on a daily basis. Again, none of this is intended to say that there are not many good teachers at both of these schools and at every school in the district. But this is a way we believe we can look at a method by which to get more quality teachers and keep them in place longer. So now I'll turn it over to Mr. McCoy and Ms. Clements and Dr. McCrary, who will present the details of this pilot plan.
Thank you, Dr. Royster. Dr. Royster actually summed up most of this in his opening statements here as well, but we talked about it being a 4-year pilot at Lakeview and Alexander. Incentivizing, I will say that when you, Ms. Spitzer will send you all of the research, it's a significant amount of research that we looked at across the last 3 years, really. There are quite a few models, probably the most famous with the Department of Education that did an incentive model in 7 states. It was deemed successful. However, it was not achievement-based. It was more retention and recruitment-based, tapping teachers from schools to say, if you go to X school, we'll give you $10,000 just to go over here and teach. So it was not based on achievement. The end of that study did find that there was achievement gains in the students by virtue of the fact that they were tapping experienced teachers to go and teach at those schools. However, again, did not have a achievement component directly tied to it. Their whole incentive, if you will, was simply to go and teach at that school for $10,000 a year. So there's many models like that around the country that are more recruitment and retention based. And there are some achievement models out there as well, as Dr. Royster mentioned, looking at the research. And then also we are part of multiple consortiums that we're able to reach out and tap those districts that actually are implementing it. Talk to both district level administrators and then in some cases talk to teachers from those actual systems that work in those incentive based models for both achievement and recruitment and retention. So the primary goals of the model is to ensure students receive the high quality instruction necessary to facilitate their highest possible achievement. Ideally, again, for Lakeview's stance, we need to move them out of their CSI designation status. All of you get those updates each year. As you may recall, it's been maybe 8 months since we've done that last presentation, but if you will recall, with our state designation status, our last one last year, Lakeview did enter into second cycle CSI, which is the lowest designation that a school can receive. Means they're performing at the bottom 5% of the state as a Title I school. So that's a one cycle designation is 3 years, second cycle is another 3 years. And after that, if the state follows the model that was proposed when it was first put in place 7-8 years ago, COVID disrupted, of course, some of that. They would be eligible for state takeover in 2025 when the second cycle ends. So the whole goal, of course, is to get them off any designation list from the State Department and make sure our students are achieving. Again, you can see here again, improving student, for specific goals, improving student attainment and acquisition of individual academic skills, creating a culture that prioritizes learning and instruction, attracting those high quality teachers to our lowest performing schools that are in this pilot program, raise the achievement level of the school through incentivizing our staff, recognizing and incentivizing with the goal of attracting and retaining those quality teachers. Again, not saying that there's not teachers at Lakeview that are not high quality teachers. We do know we have, as Dr. Royster mentioned, a large number of what we would call inexperienced teachers, that 1st to 3 year number of teachers there. We have quite a few international gate, and again, not saying they're not going to be good teachers, but again, starting out in your early career, there's a lot of coaching that has to go on, and there's a lot of support the school and the district provides those teachers. Also raising the overall achievement, as I just mentioned, to make sure they're not in any state designations, or if they are, to exit those state designations. Alexander, for example, is not in a state designation currently. Again, those won't be identified or re-identified again until 2025 after the state test scores come out. and then build the overall culture of the staff by recognizing excellent academic achievement and performance. So again, rewarding those teachers who are having some significant achievement gains. So Ms. Clements is going to talk a little bit about the staffing model.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. McCoy. So the staffing model for the Elevate program, as Dr. Royster said earlier, all certified staff and instructional aides will have the opportunity to reapply for their positions. Any staff member that is not invited back or interested in reapplying for the opportunity would be placed in another district or position throughout the district in accordance with their contract status. Tentatively, the following compensation considerations will be assigned to different types of employees, again, with the goal of attracting the highest quality, most experienced staff. So you'll see information regarding a base incentive. All principals, administrators, certified teachers, tested and non-tested, and instructional aides will receive a base incentive. Teacher performance, if an individual teacher in tested grades meets their goal, they will receive a performance bonus. And then school performance, if a school meets its overall performance goals, all staff, certified and non-certified, receive the school performance incentives since all staff contribute to the success of students. So ensuring high quality leadership, the successful principal will possess the following skills: ability to drive results, provide continuous direction and expectations of the instructional team, engage in coaching of staff and instructional leadership team, create a culture of learning focused on student achievement, conduct strategy meetings and engage in crucial conversations with staff, engage with district support in academics and human resources, provide structures to effectively manage operation and instruction, and provide instructional leadership to all staff members and lead the creation and monitoring of the instructional vision of the school. Here are the details of the compensation model. So in that first column, you can see the addition to the base salaries for the positions that we discussed. So you'll see tested teachers there, certified, non-certified, teach support, instructional aides, principals, and administrators. Over in the next column, you'll see the annual required PD amounts, bilingual, ML certified, school performance goal, teacher growth, and then the total maximum, which is the highlighted column there, and the total minimum, which is going again to be same information as you see in the addition to the base salary information. So eligibility for compensation. Teacher eligibility includes working a full year-long contract of 190 days. Personal attendance is at 96% or greater. Full bonuses are awarded if attendance is 96% or greater. Bonuses will be prorated based on days of absence if attendance is between 90% and 96%. If attendance is below 90%, a prorated bonus based on days of attendance will be provided if an employee has a long-term documented medically approved leave. Participate fully in all professional development requirements, which is fully compensated. Evidence of highly effective teaching, meets high growth in overall ELA and mathematics, value-added growth in grades 4 to 8, and a threshold of 75% exceeds expectation in grade 3. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McCreary.
Thank you. Good morning. Just to make one correction, the bottom, that last bullet where it says threshold 75%, that should be 50%. So that's an error. I'll talk about that a little bit later. The growth model, teacher growth model that we'll use is a growth model developed by Education Analytics. Education Analytics is a vendor that the State Department has used since at least 2018, 2019. Their largest customer client right now is New York City schools. They also operate and are a vendor for many other schools across the country. The growth model they have, it uses a particular statistical technique, logistic regression to control for educator impact so that they can determine The impact of a teacher in a tested grade in a tested subject area. And the way they do that, they hold or control for prior achievement. Research studies for the past few decades have determined, of course, based on the information that we have available to us, that prior achievement is a predictor of future achievement. And so holding prior achievement steady, they look for the impact or the value added of an educator. So the way the model works, after spring testing is complete, Education Analytics then collects 4th through 8th grade student data. Of course, the reason they don't collect 3rd grade data is because there's no prior achievement for those students. So we're looking at a different way to measure 3rd grade teachers' impact on achievement. Again, I'll mention that a little bit later. And so we're focused on mathematics and English language arts, and they look at and control for prior achievement and make those adjustments, and they're calculated. That calculation then creates a customized statistical target for each student. Don't think about a target as some future score. Remember, the test scores come back. When they come back, then they calculate that target off of actual test scores. So the target is a prediction, but the target is not for the next year, it's for that immediate term. So each student gets a customized target, and that target is the state average growth of similarly performing based on that prior achievement as in the school by the grade level and within the subject area. So one student is compared to students across the state at the same grade level and the same tested subject area who started at about the same performance level, achievement level, the prior year, or over an average of prior years if they have greater than 1 year of test scores. And so this example to the right shows you where a student starts out on SC Ready across the possible lowest performing scale score to the highest scale score, and then again they create a customized target for an individual student. Then they compare the students' actual scores to the target scores, and you can see in this example they see if the student exceeded the target or if they did not meet the target, and then by how much. In the visual on the left, you'll see this particular student exceeded the target by a few points, whereas on the right, that student did not meet the target. And so then for teacher value added, they create all of these targets, and they look at whether these individual students within a classroom met or did not meet those targets, and by how much. They aggregate that up to create a teacher value added score. That value added score is then reported on a range from 0 to 6, with 3 being the state average. So any score at 3 or above is, of course, a score of 3 is a state average, so any teacher scoring at 3 is designated to have average growth. Any score above that 3 is designated as some level of higher performance, higher growth than the state average. And any level below a 3 is designated on a range of lower than state average growth. So the way this model, we'll calculate this model, is based on having above average growth, which is needed to get these schools off of the designated priority lists. So as you can see in grades 4 through 8 in overall ELA and math, we're looking at a score that also includes plus 0.67 standard deviation. So that would move that score to the 75th percentile of average growth. So teachers would need to perform, their students would need to perform, they would need to have a value-added impact at the 75th percentile or above. We would also look at what's called a confidence interval, creating a lower level confidence interval, which is at the state mean or 3.0. That confidence interval means that we can be 95% sure that the teacher's actual value-added score resides at least at or above the state mean, in addition to their score at 3.67 or above. For grade 3, again, there's no value-added prior achievement scores for these students. So this is a score based on meets or exceeds expectation. The measure is set for grade 3 teachers at 50% of their students who are continuously enrolled from the 45th day to the first day of testing or the 160th day of school. 50% of those students either meet or exceed expectations in ELA and mathematics, and potentially that would increase or be adjusted in additional years. What this means for other teachers, those also who aren't tested, and for other staff members at the school, in order to get the school performance incentive, the school will need to have met or will need to have an overall report card rating of average or above, a report card achievement indicator of average or above, and a report card progress indicator of average or above. Currently, 50% of all schools in the state meet this criteria, and there are Title I schools and Greenville County schools that also meet this criteria for elementary and middle schools.
I will say too, building on that growth model, we will update you in November as well when we do the test score workshop of the new state accountability model, this is also based off of the new accountability. You can actually, well, today, once the report cards go live, you can actually look on the report cards and see the new accountability model reported. It doesn't count towards the report cards this year, but it is being reported this year, which is based on individual student growth and whether or not individual students have met their growth targets. So our schools in the future will be based on did individual students and how many individual students actually met their growth targets that the state sets for them. So a very similar model to what Jason just described to you. Ours is a little bit more based on growth as far as what I would call attainable growth, as far as students, what they can attain based on their like peers. The state's not quite built that way, but we'll give you more details of that model, which does go into effect. We're in it right now currently. The new report cards coming out next year will be based on that individual student growth and how many students were able to attain their targets. So as we're talking about also staff training, that's part of the incentive or that compensation model that Dr. Royster mentioned at the beginning there and Ms. Clements. We will teachers will be paid for attending a week-long training session in the summer. Some of that, as you know, happens already through Title I dollars in our Title I schools. They will pay teachers a few days or up to a week to come into school and really work with teams of coaches to really plan that first 9 weeks, ideally, so that they can get in there, get started, and they've kind of got their plans done. The training will be focused on the expectation of continuous communication, increased observations, supporting the team to drive those results, and support and expectations if the results are not achieved. So what do we do if we're not achieving the results? What kind of coaching do we put in place for teachers who may not have achieved the results where all their students were growing and meeting their targets? How do we support those teachers? And as I mentioned, teachers would be compensated for that time spent in professional learning, much like they are now in the Title I schools that build that into their plan, or have sub days where teachers come out and they get a sub for a half day for grade level, so you can come out and plan for the next couple of weeks or 9 weeks. That's a model we've used fairly frequently over the last 8 years or so. And then the accountability for this, the teachers do have to meet the required goals. If the goals are not met, as I said, aside from the support plan that we put in place, we already have coaches, both school-based and district coaches at all of our Title I schools, actually, and really any school that requests assistance from the district, we go in and help coach. After the second year, it is possible for reassignment to another school if that teacher's not meeting their growth targets, if they're not meeting the achievement levels that have been outlined. And obviously the principal performance will be assessed annually as well, to making sure those goals are being met that Ms. Clements went over at the beginning of the presentation. And then performance may regularly monitored throughout the years. You know, we have supports in place. We don't have to wait for the tests to come. We actually have supports throughout the year that we can see where students' progress is as they go through the year. And obviously some of that's anecdotal as well as classroom observations, going in, observing and seeing what's going on in classrooms. And then finally, for the funding model, we are looking at, you've seen the recommendation probably from the administration there, it's listed on the screen. You can see again, we are looking at a Title I contribution as well for Title I to contribute to this model of $3.3 million, and then the request from fund balance to fund the 4-year pilot program of $4.5 million. So this is kind of a shared ownership between our Title I federal dollars and a request from fund balance. And at this point, Morgan, Dr. McCreary, I will take any questions.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Leventis-Wells, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll be glad to. So, I have a question. I have several questions. How many administrative changes have we had at Lakeview in the last 5 years?
Well, ask Ms. Clements to confirm that, but I believe in 5 years there would have been 2 changes.
Does that include all of the administration?
No, that's a principal change.
So we've had 2 principals in the last 5 years.
Yes.
But that, I'd like to know also other administrators.
We'd have to pull that and get it to you.
Because I'm not going to make a decision until I have all this information. Also, how many students have transferred from Tanglewood and Berea into Lakeview in the last 3 years?
You have to have planning and demographics pull those numbers.
Okay, well, I would like to know that as well. I would also like to just go over just a couple of things. These are some of the content classes have 3 teachers per team. And last year, for example, 6th grade, most students had 0 world history being taught because 2 of the teachers left during the year. And so they had a fill-in teacher that did not teach them world history. So then that sets them back. And that's why those grades are not performing.
Well, actually, Ms. Leventis-Wells, history is not a tested subject area.
Okay, but it's a learning process, which happens
Certainly.
in other classes.
Goes directly to our concern about our ability to attract and retain teachers.
Exactly. Staffing is an issue. ISS is a concern. If we don't have someone in ISS that's going to really work with those students that are going to ISS and are able to use their Chromebooks and their cell phones in ISS, then what are we reinforcing when they go to ISS? We're reinforcing that this is easy, I get to play, so I want to go back into ISS and not learn. So once again, that's an issue. Let's see, I mean, I have a lot of, I really tried to do my homework on this because this really concerned me when I did receive several calls, and you were not one of them. So I just wanted to point that out. You are not one of them. And I'm disappointed at that. But anyway, I heard you. With that being said, at every school, there are some teachers that are not good in the classroom and need to find another place. But to go in a school, did the principal, when she took over this year, did she know that we were going to do this? Did she know you were going to do this?
This is not the principal's first year.
This is her second?
This is her third year.
So who left Lakeview last year? Didn't someone,
No principal left Lakeview.
administrator left?
There probably was an assistant that left, yes, ma'am. I don't know which one.
So was she blindsided totally by this, or was she?
We've been discussing this with principals for more than a year. I believe she was actually in the group of principals that met with you all.
She was.
Is that right?
You sure?
Yes.
No, they're sure who was in that group.
Yes.
Okay, so I want to put this on the record that she knew about this.
She was and when we went over the proposed incentive model with principals, she was one of the focus group principals, yes.
How many principals were there?
I believe there was 8 or 9.
She was one of them.
She was one of the, yes. Now, at that point in time, last year, whenever that was that we did that, we did not name schools. That was just the incentive model as a whole, proposing this. What's your input on this? What do you think about this? Doing this as incentive model, we put the compensation packages up there. All that was put towards them.
I think one thing that we have to keep in mind, because it seems most of this conversation, at least at this point, is centered on Lakeview. We'll make sure we don't miss the point. Mr. McCoy made it, but it might have kind of slipped by because we talked about a lot of information. Their performance is at the bottom 5% of Title I schools in the state of South Carolina. If there is no change to the state's accountability model and there is no improvement, substantive, immediate improvement in the academic performance, in 25, that school will be taken over by the state of South Carolina.
And I understand that perfectly. But what I also understand and what I want to know is, are we moving students into a different school? I want to know how many students transferred from Tanglewood and Berea in the last.
Well, we don't move any students. As you know, we have open enrollment and we have students who move. They change their physical address. In fact, that's about 8,000 districts, students that move within our district every year.
Okay.
The highest rate of movement is along the Highway 25 corridor, which is also where we have the highest level of poverty in the district. It's also where we have the schools that have the greatest academic challenge. They also have the greatest transiency between and among those schools. So we will have planning and demographics pull the transiency rate for all of those schools and provide that to the board members.
I'm going to just make one statement, and then I'm going to pass it, and then I'm going to have other questions afterwards, but I want others to have a chance to talk. But, you know, if we're really concerned about this, I think the assistant middle school Dr. McDonald should probably take a position in that school and try and get that school moving in the right direction. That would send a message that we really care, and we're going to place someone from the administration that is in middle schools and leads the middle schools, put them in there for a year, and let's see how effective that's going to be. So that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell.
Thank you, Ms. Dooley. Okay, I have a question about, is this just going to be based on the standardized testing? I know that you said something about growth, but I do not want those people to get in there and just teach to a test. So how are we going to look at benchmarks? Because a lot of kids have test anxiety and are not good at standardized testing. So I want to know, what are we going to do across the year, over the year, and seeing what kind of growth Can you tell me
Yeah.
what we got, what we're gonna have in place?
So you mentioned really the big key indicator we have, of course, is those benchmarks that are 92 to 95% aligned to the state assessment that we do look at. Now that's grades 2 through 8. We don't have that obviously for kindergarten, first and second. Every grade level, we are looking at that grade level's test score. So kindergarten, first grade, we look heavily at the FastBridge data. You guys have seen that before. That's the one that is, what kind of looks like the Christmas, just a red and green chart in yellow as far as where our students are as far as at risk or not at risk in reading. So we look heavily at that for kindergarten, first grade. Second grade does do benchmarks as well, and they also have MAP that we do for the GT testing that we have data around that we can look at. And then clearly, obviously for 3 through 8, we have the standardized test, but also the benchmarks so that we can, to your point, we're looking at that and principals are looking at that and teachers are looking at that in that PLCs. So we know in October, getting ready to take those benchmark tests, we'll know in October which kids have not mastered which standards so that we can intervene with those students.
So will the bonuses be connected to the benchmarks, or they would just get the bonus at the end of the school year?
It would actually be, it's connected to standardized tests because we need it to be a high stakes test. So that's not, so we can make sure it's done with fidelity. It would not actually be, it'd be based on end of year tests, yes, but as you know, right now, we're getting ready to release today or a few weeks ago, release the test scores. We really wouldn't have the test scores to pay out the bonuses really until this time of year every year. So October, and when you want to use the October date, that report card that's getting ready to release today actually accounts for student attendance. So if the kid has not been in a school long enough to be attributed to that school, when the report cards are reported, that's when those students are actually pulled out. They're not considered in that calculation.
I see what you're trying to do, but I'm still concerned that we're just basing it on the standardized testing.
The incentives are based on the incentivized testing because, again, when we look at those models, you really have to have a high stakes test. It can't just be, goals that are set or, formal assessments. It does need to be based on a standardized test. And I wouldn't necessarily say, I would argue to agree that probably everything that we do, as you know, in our curriculum, everything is standards based. I mean, everything points towards that test at the end of the year because that's what we're ultimately accountable for. There's not necessarily a way to teach the test. We have to teach the standards. We're looking at, did we actually teach the standards? Because we ultimately don't know each year what of those standards. Dr. Royster mentions all the time that we have more standards than we can possibly cover. So we don't really know each year which of those standards are going to be tested. But the teachers do their best to actually teach and prioritize those standards of what we believe is going to be tested on a test each year in the tested grades.
Okay, so who's going to help them to prioritize which standards to teach in order for them to make sure that these kids are performing?
So our team, that both the coaches that Lakeview has, Lakeview has Alexander. We have multiple coaches that are school-based that work with teachers to do that. We also have at Lakeview and Lakeview Alexander in all of our Title I schools, we have district coaches that spend that. It's going to vary on how much time they spend in those schools, but it's going to be anywhere from 50 to 70% of the time in those schools working with teachers and coaches.
I know everything is relationship building, and I'm hoping that the administration that goes into the school, that they are building these relationships where that the people will want to perform for them in order for our kids to be successful, because you don't want a tyrant coming in there telling you, bam, 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 beating you over the head. I need for us to have good relationships between the district administration and the people in that school building so that they will want to perform. So I know what we're trying to do, and I'm glad that we're trying to get veterans in there, veteran teachers in there that know their stuff to teach our kids. But it's also, we got to look at classroom management and teaching those teachers how to manage their classes and how to look at how to intervene before they have to get to that ISS point and all of that. So I hope that that is all in this model,
Yes, ma'am. You actually mentioned relationships. It's relationships across the board. The same can be said in classrooms with teachers, and you know this, that the teacher to student relationship is critical. And how, because that ultimately, good relationships with students who are engaged actually cuts back on the discipline and the things that you're talking about. So those strategies, and we talked about, it's on that chart, but we talked about the GATE and international teachers, you know, the alt-cert teachers, which we have, you know, a good many in those schools. They actually have, in our first year teachers, they actually have, you know, separate coaches that actually work with them on those very things that you're talking about. Is that really how to set them up for success with classroom management? How those, I won't say non-academic because they work on academic too, but really trying to set them up for success at the beginning of the school year.
Well, yeah, because the teachers need to have a learning environment without disruptions. And if we give them the tools so that they can take away a lot of those disruptions, then the kids can learn. But I see where you're going with it. Thank you, Ms. Doolin. That's all I have.
Thank you. Ms. Brett.
Thank you, Ms. Doolin. I understand that the principals, that you said there were 8 or 9 principals that were involved in the planning process or actually had some input when you guys started talking about this model. How many teachers were involved?
We did a teacher executive forum. So it's going to be 8 or 9, 10 teachers of the forum.
Okay.
Executive forum.
And I understand that after you gave the presentation to the teachers at Lakeview, they had questions and that they were asked to put those on a Google spreadsheet. I would like to know what kind of questions those teachers had.
Dr. McDonald may be able to address that. I don't know that, Dr. McDonald, I believe you have a spreadsheet.
Yes, at both schools, both Alexander and Lakeview, we created an opportunity for teachers because we knew that due to timing, we'd not be able to take all the questions. And some questions were very specific to individuals. So we didn't want to speak to everyone about an individual question. So we do have a Google form with our goal that HR, and we would be able to really look at those details that they were specifically asking for in that process. So we have those questions that we'll be responding to.
We'll be glad to send you a copy of the questions that were asked and the answers that were provided. One thing that's always important that we have to keep in mind, that whenever we roll out something that's a significant initiative that we're going to bring to the board for approval, we walk a fine line between letting employees know prior to the board meeting that that's going to be the subject of discussion at the board meeting and not sharing all the detail before the board has the detail. So what will happen is we'll take all those questions. If this is passed by the board, not just the committee of the whole, but by the board, there will be a second meeting on site at those 2 schools where they will go through with every employee there all the presentation that we've done today. Now, obviously they have access to it because it's on board docs, but again, we try to make certain that we're keeping employees informed when there's a matter that will come before the board that may affect them, but not in a way that we have provided full detail of that prior to the board having the opportunity to discuss it, ask questions about it, or in this case, to vote on moving it to the Board of Trustees as a whole.
Thank you, Dr. Royster. You guys also mentioned attendance. Do we have the numbers or maybe even some statistics? I mean, are our teachers missing a lot of their time at schools right now? Are we seeing a trend of teachers not coming into the classroom and teaching a lot, or kind of, do you have an answer for that?
The 96%, if I remember correctly, that was set is the average teacher attendance for Greenville County schools.
Okay.
So that, I can only speak to last year. We presented to the board last year the attendance rates at the 6 schools or 7 schools, and so that ranged anywhere from 88% teacher attendance to 96% teacher attendance.
Okay. And then, I guess, you know, as far as the funding model is concerned, I see that it's over 4 years. So let's say we do get this program going, is it going to continue this kind of funding model for every 4 years? Is that what we're thinking?
Well, the left side, which would be the Title I plan contribution, so to speak, That's coming out of current Title I funding. We simply, all we have to do is write it into those two schools' plans, or it can be written into any school's Title I plan. That pays the base additional salary amount, which includes the $3,000 for being a teacher there and the $2,000 for training in summer. So it covers that $5,000, which would be a fixed cost. Because you can have that, as long as you have the program, you have that cost. The amount to the right would cover basically two things. The 4.5 would cover if every person in each of those two schools earned the full amount of the bonus they might earn in a 4-year period, it would cost that. It would also include for us to secure a third-party assessment of the performance of the program. I partner with a university to research the success of the program. So that's not a fixed cost. It's going to vary. And after 4 years, obviously, we'd have a better idea of how much we're paying out. And then any amount that we did not use in that amount, if the program were to be continued, we would recommend you roll that forward to continue the program. Or if the decision would be made that the program was not successful and would discontinue it, it would then go back to undesignated fund balance and you could designate it for some other use. But that's the max payout. The number to the right would be the max payout for the bonuses and includes an amount in there to do a third-party review of our achievement or lack thereof.
And let's say that the school does achieve, I guess, at the end of the day, these teachers do make it, and that they do achieve what this program is looking for them to achieve. At that point, does their pay scale go back down? Will they stay at that?
We would recommend that if this is successful, that the pay in those two schools, and that we would look at expanding it to the other Title I schools, because that's where we have the most difficulty attracting and retaining teachers, that they all be put on that additional pay. Then the question of the academic attainment bonus would be a separate question to consider. Was that successful? Do we want to continue that? There are Title I schools that are already, they would earn that bonus right now, but based on their report card data. There are others that would not. So there's a growth model to it, and then the new report card calculations, as I understand it, Jason, from this, not this year, but going forward, this year being the report cards for the 22-23 school year, the report cards will shift to the same test score analytics that you put together for the consideration of bonus attainment. Is that right?
State's actually moving away from the VAM model to a new model created, I guess, by Education Oversight Committee, which uses two methodologies. One's a median average target, and the other is an added value target. They use some of the same analytics, but it is different. We'll continue, and the state will continue to get VAM data, value added methodology data like the one proposed here, and the state's contracted with EA, the vendor, to produce these kinds of data, like I said, for at least the last 5 years. So we'll still have access to this data just like we have in years past, but the state report card is moving to a new model that is very student-oriented, which does not give teacher analytics.
Student performance-oriented.
Student growth-oriented, and less teacher growth-oriented.
This teacher incentive is based on the individual student growth within that teacher's class, but does that not use those same analytics to determine student growth?
Ultimately, the same philosophical methodologies going to be in place. Our model looks at, again, the previous achievement of students, or the average previous achievement if they have multiple years of test score, which again, for decades, based on the variables that we commonly have access to, is one of the greatest predictors of future achievement. Likewise, so you might be thinking, well, what if a student happens to be a multilingual student or performs less well in English than their peers? Well, those factors are included in that prior achievement. So if a student is a low performer on, say, SC Ready third grade, and they start out at, we'll say, a scale score of 330, then they're going to be compared to students when we're looking at fourth grade, and that fourth grade target, they're going to be compared to students who started out with that 330 score in third grade ELA, as an example. So the starting point, the race they will run will be the race of similar students, and looking at how they compare to those students' growth scores. Likewise, there's been some question about mobility and moving in and out. It's a painstaking process where we have to look at every single student within a school for the previous year and determine specifically how many days every student can be attributed to a particular math teacher or English teacher. And so if there's two, if there happen to be co-teaching, and we don't have very many of those, but if a classroom happens to be co-teaching a particular subject or integrating a particular subject, say with science and math, then we may have to make phone calls to the school, to the principal administration, to determine who is the attributing teacher that we will assign scores, and how long was a student, how many days did an individual student stay in that classroom. So if a student comes and goes, if they're only in the classroom for, say, 20 days, that is the only part of that student. The Education Analytics has a methodology for contributing and weighting 20 days to the impact of a teacher. So, so questions about the covariates around where students start and the time allocated where a teacher may or may not have an impact are accounted for in the model.
Thank you. I just have a couple more questions here. Looking at slide number 6, it's ensuring high-quality leadership. Looking at all these bullet points here, I guess my question is, are we not already holding our principals to these high standards? How is this any different than daily operational stuff?
Yeah, I wouldn't say this is different from what we're already doing. I think just reinforcing that, again, you know, the principals need to possess these, however many that is there. Specifically, I would say this and actually more. If you look at the principal evaluation model, the state pretty clearly lays out, you know, what principals need to be able to do, any principal in their schools. This is just highlighting some of those things that we know have significant impact on student achievement when a principal is, you know, doing these with fidelity, if you will, and the admin team, not necessarily just the principal, but the admin team.
Okay. And I guess I'll turn it over after this. I hope that we are listening to our teachers. Several people have reached out to me and said, you know, discipline is a huge problem. I don't see that anywhere in this program, how we can help them, you know, with, as Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell said, you know, the managing the classroom. I know that that is part of the leadership, but I just hope that we're listening to our teachers. Thank you.
Dr. Presley?
Thank you, Ms. Doolin. What a conundrum as far as communication goes between a faculty and a board. That's a tough line to walk. Regarding the communication on our end, or some additional needed information, the results of the meta-analysis that was conducted, I would like to see that. I know those are huge, and I know they're dense, and I know they're tough to go through, but I believe that every one of us has an obligation to make sure that we've reviewed that. Additionally, thank y'all for your willingness to share the questions from the Google form from both of the schools. I think those are going to be critical to even better understand that teacher perspective that I believe we are all committed to, and the leadership within those existing schools. I do want to say, and this is a statement, and then I'll get to my questions, isolating student growth from teacher growth, and I think I heard a whisper that the state is moving toward that. Well, shame on them, because student growth cannot happen without teacher growth. Those exist in twain. So getting to some questions, if we could go to slide 5. When we talk about instructional excellence, or the question of will instructional excellence be a part of the performance that we're taking into account? So for instance, the observations that take place regularly using the South Carolina teaching standards, or what a lot of folks call it the rubric, but the teaching rubric. And my question for that, if that is folded into this, this part of gauging our teachers' excellence, our teachers' performance, will there be extremely intentional attention given to inter-rater reliability? And by that I mean the different folks who are conducting the observations. And I know that we've got systems in place as a district to ensure that, but I would just recommend that we give extra attention if that's a part of that. And I highly encourage that being a part of it. And can we go to slide 6? I see on here a lot of management references. A lot of those bullets deal with management. I hope that from an instructional leadership standpoint, that the principal evaluation rubric, all of those pieces will be utilized heavily if decisions are made about changing leadership, et cetera, within the school building. Going to slides 8 and 9, I have several questions. We can go to 8 and 9. First of all, how will growth be measured? I think we've talked about that. If a student grows several months, okay, but they don't hit that exact target, is there any mechanism in here that the teacher will be compensated for that growth? Because we know that in many situations we get students who are so far below their expected performance level, or so far below their grade level, that moving them, so if they're 2.5 grade levels below and we move them 1.5 grade levels, right? Is there any part in this plan that would provide a teacher with any compensation for what they actually accomplished with that student?
I like Dr. McCree answer the individual growth piece. I will say, though, there's not partial compensation, but I will say that's one difference, I think, between the state model and what this model is actually looking at what is reasonable for a student to grow. So in other words, the current state model, we've got files now for every child that the state sent us based on where their growth target is. That is actually based on kind of more what you alluded to, like if they are, does not meet standards, they've got to get to meet. So when I look down that list, there's some kids that have to meet 200 and 300 points growth. Well, that's not really probably doable necessarily, because it could translate to 2 grade levels or more. So that was not necessarily a fair way, in our opinion, to do that. So Dr. McCree can speak more to how the growth targets are established in this kind of model.
I think earlier I may have used the term logistic regression, but they use linear regression. In their model, they're aggregating individual students, and those individual students' growth scores, and this is the semantics of where throwing around the term growth happens quite a bit. And so whenever I listen to your question, to me, it resonates with typical gain scores, and gain scores is based on where you are now and how much you may grow to a particular grade level, or how much you may grow in achievement. Like if we're aggregating a group of students, it would be the percent meets and exceeds. So it's moving, you would actually then compare growth for an individual student or a group of students, for instance, subgroups or a school, to state gains or to district gains. But that's very different than this model and its term of growth. That's where every student in the every student in a particular classroom may start out at a different level, and their comparison or peer group's going to be different. And they can contain thousands of students, tens of thousands of students from across the state, depending on where their peer starts. And then that growth, theoretically, again, this is theoretically, if a student could have no growth at a particular grade level in a subject area, but the state peer group could actually regress. And through that regression, that no growth would actually be seen in the model as growth. And so they would advance above their state peers, it would show growth, and the teacher would get credit for the actual difference compared to the peer. But if you were looking at scale scores or their a classroom's percent meets exceeds, it might not show any growth. Just because we're looking at growth not in gain scores, but in comparison to a peer-to-peer growth.
Okay. So I also noticed that the amount designated for annual required PD is X. How will we ensure that that PD is transferred into the classroom? What is what are the mechanisms in place? So when you have new learning for an educator and they come away from that, how do we know as a board and as a district that that new learning that that educator has picked up, hopefully, has acquired, that they are actually transferring that into their classroom and using it to inform the growth of their students?
So a lot of that's going to happen through, I think we presented maybe last spring on the coaching, the learning walks and instructional rounds. So a lot of that, if we see across the school an issue instructionally, that's when we're delivering the PD, the coaching, giving teachers time to actually implement that in that classroom, and then circling back around in these two schools' cases also with district staff. That would be then to look to see, are we seeing the impact of the PD or the coaching in those classrooms? Part of those days, though, those 4 days, would also be planning. So that would be working with our staff, working with the school coaches to actually plan those first couple of days of school. Similar to what we did this year with some of the staff, so that they have a good start of the school year. They have good plans that they can implement in the classroom. And then, of course, that follow-up really is with the principals and the observations, some observations from our staff as well. But they're typically in those first couple of weeks, and they're supporting the teachers who need some support or want some support in the classroom.
Could we also consider some of those key responsibilities that are in the South Carolina teaching rubric professional domain, like participating and applying their new learning, reflecting on teaching, SLOs, et cetera? I hate to say SLOs, those carry a bad, but those exist currently in the South Carolina teaching rubric. And my wonder is, we're talking about a PD requirement that's 4 or 5 days during the summer, correct? Is that the beginning and the end of the PD requirement, or what does that expand to throughout the year?
So throughout the year, really, we try to do more during the PLC process in the school, so teachers aren't having to stay after school to do professional development. So typically with our PLC process, they've got a good 45, sometimes 90 minutes a week that we have to work with them both for planning and any kind of professional learning that has to happen in there. We are building in, Dr. Presley, to your point about the rubrics, we are building in with our classroom mosaic tool that we've talked about before. That's our observation tool. A piece of that actually is built in for teacher reflection. So once an observation has been done by an administrator, the teacher actually can go in and reflect on that observation. They can ask questions. Sometimes it could be answer questions. It could be justify possibly something that the administrator saw. That component's in there currently. We've not every school is using it. Any teacher can have access to it. But that would be a big piece of that, to your point about the reflection on the rubric, is for teachers to reflect on their practice and can either comment, I'm going to try that next week, or I'll try that, in my next unit.
Is there a way to, I don't want to use the word standardize, because a true professional learning community, a true PLC model rolls with weekly meetings. Mm-hmm. Is there any plan, or has there been any attention given to folding this in to that PLC model in a very explicit, specific way? Because I hear a lot of we go in and we observe to see if we're seeing those things. Well, an observation can take place within an hour, and you may miss that particular strategy. So my wonder is, are we missing the mark a little bit on supporting teachers within that PLC structure to self-report on their implementation of the practices, and even to possibly bring student work with them to show evidence of whether it worked or not. So it's that ownership that we could potentially be giving to teachers.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think our higher functioning PLCs, that's on a continuum. Our higher functioning PLCs are already at the point where they are doing calibration around student work. Those are the like PLCs, so the math teachers, the English teachers, and the grade level getting together. That's probably the other piece as far as reflecting or asking about strategies. That's probably happening more with our coaches in the PLCs than probably the administrators, although we do ask that the administrators be present, the ones that are assigned to be present in those PLCs. The strategy piece, though, and the reflection probably is going to happen more with our coaches than it would be with the administrators. But they spend a good bit of time individually, I would say, with the teachers that are asking for help or need a little bit more support.
I would definitely recommend that we streamline and standardize and protect that process as much as possible. So we talked about, if we could go to slide 18, we talk about training.
Is it this slide?
Yes, staff training to ensure success. We see the week-long training session during the summer, but what this is going to require is an abundance of teacher coaching and support to achieve those results. What training will be provided ongoing to establish those strong structures from both the district and the school level? Will there be teacher leaders that are identified to lead beyond the scope of department chair, or what might that look like?
So ideally, if we're following the true PLC process, we would, the team leaders, not so much the department chairs, although department chairs do play a big role in that. The team leaders would be the ones, though, that ideally we would continue developing, the ones that lead the PLC process, to help continue developing and carrying that forward. I think this first staff training that we would be looking at, like I said, that's going to focus a little bit more on the training around the first 9 weeks of school, the lessons, the units, and those types of things. Once we get into school, we typically start off with really the first week or two of school as a learning walk to then identify, here's what we're seeing across the board, or it could be in a specific subject, across math, across English, and then here's the basically going back and building a professional development plan that may include professional development and coaching for, to your point, to PLCs or individual coaching teachers. So it's not, to your point, it's not a one and done. It's got to be an ongoing. This would just be the springboard of the hopefully jumping out. And I will say again, most of our Title I schools do a version of this already that they get compensated for. It may not be a week all the time. It may be 2 or 3 days. Some of them have the flexibility to do that in the summer when the teams want to get together and need to get together and plan. But many of our teachers do get together as their PLCs and do the planning before school starts because it's so hectic.
And while a springboard is absolutely, a great practice, when you're springing off the springboard, you don't even know your students yet. Mm-hmm. And the real movement and learning occurs as you move into the year with those individual kids. So I hope that we stay very, very committed to that. And the last thing, the moving of teachers after 2 years. That is problematic because if a teacher is truly subpar and not doing their job and has been evaluated as appropriate the way that we expect for all schools, then moving a problem is not the answer. And I worry about that because wherever they move to, that's going to be an issue in that new location. So I would just give some additional thought to that. And thank y'all for your patience with all of my questions.
Dr. Presley. Next is Ms. Mosley.
Thank you, Ms. Doolin. Okay, I just have a few questions. I keep hearing the term high-quality teacher. I'm assuming we have a rubric or some type of definition for that, because I would like to think that all of our teachers are high quality, but I mean, I understand that maybe experience factors into that. Maybe, whether someone's been teaching within the first 1 to 2 years may not be considered just by virtue of they're new to the profession. So how do we define that as a district?
So part of that is looking at for this model, we'll be looking at the test scores, the previous successes those teachers have had. It doesn't have to be necessarily standardized test scores. It could also be, as we talked about early in the early grades, even the fast bridge scores, how many kids are moving out of at risk into some risk or some risk into no risk in the younger grades, for example, because that's all we really have for that. I think also Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell mentioned it too, is while this is more anecdotal, there's nothing that measures this, but a large part of that really has to do with the interviewing of the, if there are people applying for outside, whether it be outside district or outside the school, is talking with that principal. How are they with forming relationships with students? Even looking down to the data with teachers, as far as how do they relate, or how do they perform with students in poverty? Because we know that that's very different. Teaching students in poverty is very different from teaching students who are high socioeconomic. So looking at, somebody could be very successful in a school that has very little poverty, but not be successful in a school like this, or they could be. But we have the ability to break that down even within the classrooms at any school to see of students in poverty, how are they performing in that teacher's classroom? Are they meeting their goals and their targets? So I think that interview process is going to be critical, and those questions that we need to ask those principals that may be coming from inside or outside the district will be key in identifying the right teachers who are committed to and understand students of poverty, because it's very different teaching in that environment.
Well, I think maybe more to address your question about a matrix. If you look at the teacher evaluation instrument, I think you'd see the matrix there, much of which is based on not just student performance, but what you would observe a classroom teacher doing over time in their classroom that then goes into that observation, and they get a score on their observation based on both outcomes and observation of their actual teacher interaction with their students, how they've structured their lesson, how they plan their lesson, how they make adjustments to it during the course of the class period. One of the big things is student engagement. Are students actively engaged? If they're not actively engaged, is that teacher doing things to get their engagement, to get them re-engaged or to get them engaged the first time? Many of those things are observational, and they go in the teacher evaluation observation instrument. I don't think Jeff mentioned it earlier when he talked about teacher observations, but we now have a platform where all of those observations are available to every administrator in that building, and also would be available to Jeff and his staff and to Dr. McDonald. They can go look and see anyone else's observation of any teacher. Some teacher behaviors, to Jeff's point, obviously you can measure. Whether they did well on standardized testing, if it's a core tested subject area, well, that's fine for those core subject tested areas, but most of our areas are not core subject tested areas. So there it is more the observation of best teacher practices. And to the point made earlier, certainly we want every student in every class in the district to have a quality teacher. There will always be variance within quality of teachers, no matter how excellent a job our teachers do. There'll always be some that are more stellar than others, some that will be average. Those that are below average, we need to be moving them to above. But if what we're doing, if we're actually continuously improving the way we should be, we're constantly moving average up, so that we've moved the teaching ability, the teacher quality across the board. But one of our great challenges in this entire process is the vast number of inexperienced teachers serving these students. Many of the issues that questions have arisen about are, quite frankly, answered by more experienced personnel. Now, not all of them. You still get into there are teachers that interact better with certain populations than other teachers do. That's just a fact. Some can teach no matter where you put them. You put them in a room, a group of students, no matter anything about that group of students, and they can teach. But that's not every person. People do better with some pairings than others do. So we're looking for the very best fit in those classrooms with the highest quality teachers we can have, And for the ones that are inexperienced, or perhaps not as experienced in working with this population, that's one of the reasons to do the staff development with them. Try to help them build those skills and build those attributes that they may not currently possess, or that they may not possess in great enough quantity yet. But it is not as simple as test scores. It's not as simple as observation. It's not as simple as interview. But it kind of at the end of the day, it's as simple as putting all those three things together to determine, in fact, this person has a great likelihood of success here because of the three things we see. And once they get there, the things that are observed there, what needs to be improved upon to make them reach the level we need them to reach, to continuously improve.
Okay, thank you. So to your point, and to Jeff's point as well, when you're looking at your applicant pool, we're not necessarily suggesting that a teacher coming out of a high-performing school with maybe a higher socioeconomic demographic is not going to be considered for a position in, if they want the challenge, if they want the opportunity to grow themselves, in my case. So in other words, they may not possess the experience within a lower performing school or a certain demographic, but we're not excluding them from being considered for this opportunity. Is that what I'm
That would
understanding?
be true. And the other thing that we might consider, because we don't always think of it that way, there are teachers in every school in this district that teach students that possess the same demographics that we have at Lakeview. Just the school itself may not look exactly like that. So we have highly successful teachers in schools with very low levels of poverty that have great ability and an excellent reputation of working with students that are in poverty. But even if they're not, it doesn't exclude them from being considered. Now, what we would look at is how many teachers we might take from a particular school, because we don't want to take too many from one school to this. But this goes back to the original thing. We want people, to the point you were making, that want this challenge. We want people that are interested in doing this. We have other places they can teach where we're not doing this. So if this is not what appeals to you, we put you somewhere else where this is change. This is huge change. We've never done anything quite like this on this scale before. But the reason we're presenting this to you, the reason we're recommending this, the reason that we are willing to do this is because all the other things we've done aren't working. They're not working. It's time for us to do something radically different, but to do it in a way that we have learned from other places that have done something similar. What part of the things that you did were not successful, that didn't lead to the outcomes you wanted to attain? It goes back to the things I mentioned at the outset. It was where they had teachers competing one against the other, which discouraged collaboration and working together. It had goals set that were not objective, so people did not earn a bonus based on an objective set of criteria. It did not include all teachers, or it did not include all staff. So we've tried to craft this in a way that it addresses each of those shortcomings, because we've got to do something having nothing to do with the fact that these schools are at the bottom, unfortunately, of similar schools in our state, having nothing to do with the fact that we've invested significant resources and we haven't attained the achievement we need to attain, having wholly to do, we cannot continue to shortchange the students in those two schools and in other schools with significant academic challenges, and by continuing to do the same things we've done that have not produced the results that they and their families deserve to have. That's what drives this. It's not a desire to create disruption or to exercise control. In fact, we're trying to avoid having an external party exercise control. It is simply we've got to do a better job for the students we're serving in these two schools and in schools similarly situated.
As a former special education advocate, I appreciate the outside the box thinking, because doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, is sometimes nuts.
It usually doesn't attain those different
So, because we're asking, I mean, this is a challenge to our district. It's a challenge to our staff. It's a challenge to other teachers. How are we, from an HR perspective? I mean, normally when we have a job posting, we just go out and post it, and teachers or staff can muddle through the listings and say, oh, that looks like a position I might like to do. But is this something that we're going to take a different approach from marketing it within the district to make sure that whoever is choosing to put their name in the hat for this understands the significance of it, the ramifications of it, the challenge of it, the this is the outside the box nature of it, so to speak.
Absolutely. So in November, we plan to hold information sessions for internal candidates and external candidates that may be interested in this program. In the meantime, we plan to market the Elevate model internally via our e-management, e-bulletin, SCASA blast, which goes to our internal folks and external folks. And we're working with communications to put together a marketing plan, to your point, to make sure that those folks that are interested know everything that they need to know about the opportunity, how important it is, what it means for them. And so we are in the process of putting that together. And again, November will start the time frame of which we do those information sessions via likely Zoom, where internal candidates can call in and hear the information, as well as external folks. All positions that will be reposted via our website, and then via these additional marketing campaigns, we will guide those candidates to our website to apply.
Okay, so on the flip side of that, if we have teachers at these schools that currently choose, this doesn't sound like something they want to sign up for. We have guaranteed that we will find another position for them within, and do we have an equally sensitive process to transition them out of, because obviously this is an emotional issue. So
absolutely.
I mean, like as Dr. Royster said, we haven't done this before. This is
absolutely, that's a great question. And as human resources, that's my team's top priorities, to take care of our people. We want to, if we have teachers at these schools that decide that they do not want to return, then we want to support them through that process. They may want to try a different school in Greenville County, and that's okay as well. We want to have conversations with them. My team will have conversations with them regarding openings, where they want to go. Our district is vast, and so we want to take into consideration geographic locations, their, family situation, whatever, things may drive them to choose which site that they want to teach at. So the conversations will begin with letting HR know that you'd like to transition. We will be moving into the times that our administrative and teaching positions are posted, so we will have conversations with those folks. They will interview just as any other candidate does for the positions that they're interested in. But the difference is these folks, if they are, let's say, unsuccessful maybe in interviewing for a position that they are looking for, we will then work to place them in open positions within the district via their certificate.
This is kind of it's a lot larger scale version. We actually do this every year because we have schools that lose teacher FTEs. Now, a lot of times they are able to do that through attrition, and we don't have to identify a person, but every year we're going to have some number of people that,
right,
by our policy, that's the position or the person that needs to go. So what Morgan described to you is pretty much the process we use, where we might have one or two in a school. I think this year we had some schools, because their enrollment shifted so much, they lost 4 or 5 positions. Maybe at the end of the day, that was a couple of people. That's happened in years past. If we closed or combined schools, that's been a number of years since we've done that. But over the years, we've come up with this very similar protocol. We'd rather you go somewhere you'd like to go, but that's not always possible. But we'll try to get you as close to there as we can possibly get you to there in an area you're certified to teach or certified to work in.
So moving away from HR, did I understand you to say, obviously you've looked at other districts that have done this model or done a model, let's just call it that. Anywhere in the state of South Carolina, has anyone done this? And then if so,
there are a number of TAP schools in the state of South Carolina. I don't know how many still exist. That was fairly popular mid-2000s to probably 2010 or 11. Some of the drawbacks in that are things that we've addressed in this. We can send you the TAP school information. I don't remember what the acronym stands for.
I was going to say, what does that mean, TAP mean?
You remember what the acronym is?
Teacher Advancement Program. Dr.
No,
Preston
okay.
knows.
We never had anybody in TAP. There are districts around us that did have TAP schools. I don't know of an entire district that did TAP, but there could have been. Jason, you may know the answer to that, do you?
There were quite a few across South Carolina. We did have some TAP schools here. Tigerville is one that I remember.
For my time here.
Yeah, it was
early 2000s.
Early 2000s. Tigerville was one. Yeah, and East North Street and possibly was Metro Road. So we had a few who used it, but again, the model and the methodology regarding this is very similar. Just the supports.
Do you know if there are any that still exist anywhere in the state?
I don't believe so.
I'd have to ask. I know Pickens was fairly large. I had several staff members came from Pickens that used to be heavy in TAP, so I don't know if they still use it in Pickens, but they were a heavy TAP district.
All right. Without objections, can we please extend for 40 minutes?
As sort of a sideline to answer that, I have had discussions with the state superintendent on what we're proposing today in general. Now, when we conclude today, we'll send her the board details. The state's extremely interested in this model, and I think they're interested in replicating it in particularly some districts that they are either have in takeover status or might get into takeover status. But there's an interest in what we're doing just based on the general outline that I provided for them to perhaps use this to do as a pilot in some other areas of South Carolina.
I was actually going to ask that question, if we've had any communication with the State Department and what their thoughts are. So that's good to know. My last question, hold on, I can. Nope, I'm actually done. Thanks much. Thank you.
Next is Dr. Stiles.
Thank you, Ms. Doolin. I want to share up front that I view this issue probably through a different lens than some of you. And I want you to know that my lens is coming from experience as a school principal for many years in a very successful school, high-performing school. So when you hear my thoughts, know that that's the lens I'm looking through. And everybody has a unique lens. So if you'll just bear with me, I'd love for you to hear me out on my thoughts. First, I'd like to stress, which has already been stressed by Dr. Royster, the quality of the teacher in the classroom is the #1 factor in affecting student achievement. If you look at any textbook in education, any journal, any research, this point is resounding. And another point I want to make is that the quality of the teacher in the classroom, we know that's important for student achievement. But I'm going to tell you as a principal of 25 years that also a high-quality teacher is very skilled in managing discipline. A teacher cannot be successful in the classroom without control of the students and without great strategies and how to get the students engaged in the learning. And engagement is a very important word. Students must be engaged. And they must be allowed to learn in unique ways where they use their bodies in different modalities and song and music, engagement of the arts. That's how we get behavior improved. That's how we increase student achievement. It's obvious to me as a seasoned administrator that based on the data, we know that these two schools have been underperforming for multiple years. It hurts me to think that they're in the bottom 5% of Title I schools. To me, that is not acceptable. And this is not the path forward. We, just as Mrs. Mosley stated, we cannot continue in the same path. We cannot. And expect different outcomes. We've got 7 years of data and evidence to say that that is not going to happen at Lakeview Middle School or or at Alexander Elementary School. We've got to do something radically different. This is an innovative strategy. It's out of the box thinking. It's an opportunity for us to try something to make a difference for these students. They deserve the opportunity to be in a school with a culture that is focused on student achievement with the very most skilled teachers. They deserve that. I want that for those students. I support that. In order to get that, though, we must employ a plan that's different to ensure that we have the most experienced and most successful teachers. And that culture that I'm talking about, this should be the focus. Success, nothing less. When you have a building of highly skilled, highly seasoned teachers with a track record of success, that's their motto, success, nothing less. That's their ongoing focus. That's what I have found to be true as an administrator. We need that for the students at Lakeview and Alexander. Clearly, this is the only path forward, and it's research-based. As a matter of fact, I just want to share, most of you know it, I served on the governor's task force as the chair of teacher retention and recruitment. And this very topic, when we looked at the research, came across as a positive strategy nationwide for closing the gap for some of our most underperforming schools. It's cutting edge. And what I really appreciate about the work that's been done, Jeff, by your department and by all the district staff, is you've looked at all those models extensively, and you have also made it a point to find out what were the weak areas. What were their struggles in implementation? And you have implemented strategies to make sure that this model doesn't fail here in Greenville County, that it's successful. I mean, that's a tremendous step. I can't say thank you or I appreciate you enough to know that you did that, because I feel like you want this model to work. I want it to work. I want to do something different. What I don't want is for us to stay on the same path. Folks, if we stay on the same path, we are headed toward a state takeover. That is not what we want for our district. That is not what I want for this district. As a part of the task force, we did a teacher survey, and because we were trying to get to points that the teachers, that why we were having difficulty retaining teachers. One of the points that was, or actually I'm going to talk about 2 points that were mentioned, that teachers said that they didn't have an opportunity for advancement. Highly skilled teachers said that they were frustrated because they didn't have an opportunity to advance. They had great skills, but they didn't move to the next level unless they wanted to go to a reading specialist position or instructional coach. But a lot of people want to advance with it as a teacher. So this gives those teachers an opportunity to advance. Also, teachers said that they didn't have an opportunity to increase their salaries. Look at all the other professions. You can increase your salary, get promotions. That's typical in the business world. Teachers do not have that opportunity. This is an opportunity for them to advance as a result of their skills and abilities, and also an opportunity for them to increase their salary. And this is important to some of the most seasoned, experienced, successful teachers. They have a lot of years of experience, as we've discussed. A lot of them are going to jump at the opportunity to go there, because the last several years that they work, that's going to determine what their retirement income is. This affords them an opportunity. And so I think that there will be, I think that a lot of folks are going to be interested. And I want to tell you that I'm retired and I'm not interested in leaving the retirement system and going back into teaching or being a school principal. But I'm going to assure you of this. If I were still in the workforce, I would be applying for that principal job. I'd want it. I'd be doing everything I could to work towards that. And I'm going to tell you what else. If I were a teacher in Lakeview or Alexander Elementary, and I knew I was a quality teacher, and I knew I was moving the students forward, and I was a leader, and I was making a difference, you better believe that I would reapply. Why wouldn't you? Why would somebody not do that? I can't understand why anybody would not do that. This pilot will provide our most seasoned and most successful teachers with opportunities. And it will create a culture at the school that's focused on student achievement. I foresee positive changes. Based on my experience, I foresee positive changes for Lakeview Middle School and Alexander Elementary as a result of this pilot, if this board approves it. And I want to say, I hope that everybody will think through this, because these students and their performance, this decision is going to impact that. We have a responsibility to act. And I want to thank Dr. Royster, because this is innovation. This is innovation at its best. And you know what? We said as a board, we were talking about our goals for the future, that we want to be innovative and creative. This gives us an opportunity to shine, to create a model that can be used in our state and, Dr. Royster, across the nation as a way to support students who are in schools that are struggling every day to raise student achievement. This is an opportunity that I want to grasp, and I want to support the district and all the details. A lot of details have been mentioned today. There's a lot of weeds. We'll have to work out some of the details, but let's focus on the big picture. This is an opportunity to help our students succeed and for our district to serve as the pacemaker in making a difference for children across this nation. Thank you.
Dr. Stiles. Next is Mr. Cochran.
Thank you. Some of this has already been touched on a little bit, but my first question, if we were to do this, what do we anticipate the basic interest level will be in these teaching positions among our teachers who are currently teaching at other schools in our district?
But we don't really have a good way to estimate what percent of those teachers would take advantage of this, because we've never really done anything like it before. Dr. Stiles, in some of her comments, mentioned some things that should appeal to people. For example, if you are approaching the latter years of your career, that $5,000 every year goes directly on your base for retirement. If you're more towards the middle or on the 5 to 10 years of experience, obviously $5,000 is a pretty significant pay raise that should attract people. I think it should also attract those individuals, and Dr. Stiles mentioned those, whether they're teachers that are currently in those two schools and they're doing a great job, the opportunity to be recognized for that. But I think there is also the appeal for teachers in other schools that, well, I've been doing a really good job here, and I get paid the same thing as the person in the room next to me, and in my opinion, I'm doing a lot better job than they are. My students are attaining more than they are. So there should be multiple avenues of appeal. It's just, having never done it before, it's real difficult to put a number on how many might take advantage of the opportunity to work there. When we open a new school, we never have a shortage of people applying for those positions. So if you look at it akin to opening a new school, there's certainly challenge here. There's always challenge in opening a new school. Certainly something new and different, and there's an opportunity to be compensated more. One, for being there and doing a good job, and secondly, for showing some student attainment. So from that standpoint, we would anticipate that we'll have significant level of interest, certainly our hope, but not having done it before, it's just awful hard to estimate it.
Will the teachers from our district have an advantage if they apply for those positions as compared to teachers from outside the district?
They probably have an inherent advantage because we know more about them. So you can talk to, obviously their current supervisor works for us. We have their data. We have access to their observations. All things that we could request from another district, but your own people, you're just going to know more about. So I think they would have an inherent advantage for consideration. We haven't given any thought to giving a weighting for somebody that wants to come from the inside versus the outside, but I think they just possess that inherent advantage that we know more about them and can find out more about them.
And I know you touched on this earlier, but what's our basic level of concern that, because I think when I looked it up, the two schools combined, there's over 100 teachers and professional folks that are working in those two schools. So what's our level of concern that losing quality teachers from our other schools will decrease the learning and achievement of our students at the schools that they're leaving?
That goes back to one thing, and I touched on it just briefly earlier in the meeting. We want to look very closely to not take, if we should have multiple applicants from one school, to take no more than one or possibly two from that school, depending on the size of that school. We would try not to do that. Now, again, you got only 20 middle schools. So the number that could come from another middle school, percentage-wise, the raw number could certainly be higher, considering we've got 51 elementary schools. So 50 others to draw from for Alexander. We could take fewer from an individual school and still have plenty of applicants. Middle school, we might have to take a larger number, but perhaps no greater a percentage. Because obviously a larger size school, we have more teachers there. But we don't want to gut another school, and we particularly would not want to, we'd want to be very cautious about other schools that have teachers with tremendous experience in working in a school of poverty, not to take those teachers in order to shift them from schools of poverty where we're seeing good improvement and putting them over in total at Lakeview or at Alexander. That would be a real thing we're going to have to be very cautious about doing. Hard to put a number on it, but we've got to be very cognizant, to your point, that we do not do anything to damage instruction in other schools by taking too many teachers from any one school.
And as you mentioned earlier, if we were to do this, where you mentioned that the State Department of Education is interested in this innovative pilot program, is there any chance that they may help provide any funding for it?
Well, that's certainly going to be part of our ask to them. Now, whether they may be willing to do that, don't yet know, but when we provide them with more detail, that will certainly be part of that ask.
And so at that point, if they did just, let's say they said there's $2 million available, then would that $2 million be a savings from the 4.5 that we're currently looking at?
Our take on that would be we would recommend to you to reduce the amount coming out of fund balance, because you have greater flexibility with those funds to use them for other things. We wouldn't want to take it down on the Title I side for a couple of reasons. One, Title I needs to be directly related to academic achievement in those schools. And the other, if we ever decide, based on the outcomes of this, to expand it to all Title I schools, once we set a baseline for the amount of Title I funding, and right now, 100% of the base salary add is going to be funded out of Title I. If we did less than 100%, if we rolled it out to other Title I schools, we could never use a greater percentage in them than the percent we used in these two schools. So if we dropped back and we used only 50%, when we rolled it out to all of them, if that was a decision we made, because of the Title I supplanting requirements, we could never use more than 50% in the other schools. And it would create obviously a huge general fund demand. But by keeping it on the Title I side, again, obviously goes directly to the academic attainment of those students, and that's a legitimate Title I expense. And it sets a precedent that 100% of the salary, they wouldn't allow Title I, I don't think, to be used for bonus anyway. But if they did, we want to put it on the salary side because that's the constant. We know that amount's going to be there every year and in the amount that we said. I mean, it might go plus or minus a position or two as the schools grow or drop enrollment, but generally speaking, that's a fixed cost.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
That's all, Ms. Doolin. Thank you.
Ms. Middleton?
Well, thank you. So much has been said, and very eloquently. Coming from a teacher's perspective, and I only taught for maybe several years, not a lot. The thing I think is the most important is for teachers to have smaller classes and for there to be more discipline. I'm wondering if we were to look at this program and implement it, and the more money is certainly attractive, could we also add in a little more, try to really control those class sizes and try to have, make sure we have a very strong disciplinarian in those schools. Maybe you do already, but I'm just saying, I'm talking really important because I think that I know I've heard there are good teachers that can handle kids that are running all over. I give them a gold star for that, but I think those are kind of an anomaly. I think that even really good teachers have a hard time if students are totally disengaged, not paying attention, talking in class, and all that. So I would ask you if that is a consideration as part of this program.
First, this doesn't take all their local Title I money, so they still have money to allocate for other purposes. Until and unless you get class sizes below 15, there is no measurable student achievement noted. But the problem we have with reduced class sizes, these two schools in particular, and in some other Title I schools, we are simply hiring more inexperienced first year or alternatively certified teachers. We're actually compounding our teacher quality problem by creating more teacher positions. So what we're trying to do is to keep and to recruit a greater level of experienced, regularly certified teachers that will traditionally do have and should have fewer problems engaging or disciplining students. So there is, to a degree, some trade-off there. Both of those schools have additional personnel to help with behavior. They have some aides for behavioral specialists, and Lakeview has one additional full-time administrator beyond that for other schools. And their numbers of disciplinary referrals are not really disproportionate to other similar schools in the district. One of the things we've seen there, both observation externally and talking to people there, the lack of engagement is one of the biggest issues that's pervasive in the building.
Students?
Yes.
Okay. So I feel that this is a last-ditch effort, and change is hard. So I guess I totally understand why I am hearing from teachers that don't want this or don't think that the money helps. I guess it should help, especially if you're near retirement, you get that high 3. That is certainly something to think of. Bonuses are nice. We talked about a lot about classroom size and discipline, which is, I think, in my mind, is paramount. I do understand that it's very hard to look at students without testing them, although I've always been against teaching for the test. And I don't want to think that people are going to come to do this just for the money. Because I'm hoping that it's also, the teachers have a vision and they have a motivation and a desire to do something that is for the better, for the good of everybody, for the betterment of us all, and not just thinking, can I make some more money quick? Because then we start teaching to the test and it gets very rudimentary and too structural. So that's my thoughts on this. But I'm also thinking, if we have truly tried everything and it hasn't worked, and now I guess the State Department is going to come in and do whatever they do, which doesn't sound good, then I think I certainly don't have another idea or another thought process that I think we should try. Whatever is maybe could work. And if it doesn't work, then I guess we'll come up with something else in 3 years. That's my thoughts.
Certainly our desire that it works, all great points that you made. But we don't need to be in a position of somebody else coming in here and taking over a school because we're not getting where we need to be. And we would hope people will respond to it because they like the challenge. And I think we would feel differently recommending this to you if we were sitting here and we were a school district and we had 5 schools in it, and all of a sudden we want to do this in 5 schools. There are 50 other elementary schools in this district where we're not doing this. There are 19 other middle schools in the district where we're not doing this. So if for whatever reason a teacher does not want to be part of it, there are plenty of places for them to go. Now, that they particularly want to stay at Lakeview, that doesn't help with that, but it's not forcing anyone to be in this model. They would be in this model because they chose to be in this model. And if they don't, then we will find an acceptable place for them to go elsewhere in the district. But we've got to do something, to your point. We've tried all these other things. For these particular schools, those things were not working. But if this works there, it may also help us to further increase achievement at the other Title I schools. And there's a possibility down the road that the incentive part of it, not the base pay, but the incentive part, might help increase achievement at all schools. But that's for a conversation for 4 years from now.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Next is Ms. Morrison-Fair.
Thank you, Ms. Doolin. Most of my questions have been answered. Dr. Royster I think he just touched on it. I had a question about how many Title I schools do we have? But my other 2 questions, what is a great teacher? What makes the definition of a great teacher? That has been answered. But I see this as, I completely applaud the group, the administration that came up with all of this. Because in my mind, I'm also speaking as an educator, and I worked in a similar system as this. We're talking about pulling the entrepreneurs of education to the forefront. And the fact that these teachers are saying, I'm willing to go on the front line, meet the challenge every day, and make an impact with the children. The statement about the quality teacher in the classroom is most effective, that is certainly a true statement. That quality teacher, not only is she or he effective in the classroom, but that quality teacher who models their excitement for education brings that student right along with them. That student gets up every morning and says, I don't know about school, but I'll come because Mrs. Morrison is there. She's modeling what I need to get to the next level. But that mindset needs to go not just in the classroom, but all the way up to the superintendent, to the board. I expect my colleagues to get on board and support these schools, support the administration, show up, let the students know that we also are for them. Parents need to buy in, so the students will buy in. It's not just these 2 schools, But we have schools across the district that are evidently doing well in winning the game of education. So those are my comments. I like this system. I like the fact that you're targeting teachers that want to be there. Nobody will be there who does not want to be there. I also said that about education. Nobody should be in education who does not want to be there. Whether you're paying $2.50 or $200,000.50. You want to be in education, so that is why you're there. You want to make a difference, you want to make an impact. And I thank you, Mr. McCoy, and your team for developing this system, and I see success already. I'm speaking that into existence. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Bush?
Yes. Well, this is a perfect example of be careful what you ask for because you just might get it. And we've been asking for this the 28 years that I've been on this board. We've asked several different superintendents. We've said, what do you need? What can we do? And what resources? What is it going to take? And the refrain of Mr. Meek is, he wanted wholesale change because he wanted us just to take our #1 school and switch the whole faculty, everybody, from that school to that school. Because in his mind, being here that long, his thoughts were, what we're doing is not working. And so you're the man in charge. You're the person that brings us, this is what you need. And we've asked you, and it's been different boards, it's been different superintendents, but we've all said, we know that our job is to ask, what is it going to take to be able to give these students and this school and this community the opportunity for success? I think several people have already said it. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. And so within a span of 2 years, we're not going to have control over doing the same thing. We're not going to have control over results. I mean, if we think that we've done this for 12 years and then just all of a sudden in 2 years before the state takes over, I've talked to the teachers. I've been to Lakeview. I hear their even their phone calls and their emails that I've received. They're working so hard. They can't work any harder. Leadership can't work any harder. The resources that we're giving them. So it is, I believe, I say amen to what Dr. Preacher Stiles here. Everything that she had said here before, I was just like, I was really struggling without not standing up and doing the both hands up and an amen when she got finished speaking here. But I do have some concerns. And some of them were addressed here today, and some of them are going to be in that weeds process. My biggest fear is that we do nothing. Nothing changes, and the state takes over. And if you'll connect the dots here this morning, what we've heard, the state doesn't have an answer either. They're waiting, they're looking at what we're doing to be their answer. So why do I want somebody coming in from the outside that is not as dedicated as what we have done over the last few years, as what your staff has done, Dr. Royster, as the research that you've put together and you said, what's going to be best for Greenville? We're addressing those weak links, and we're in charge of our own destiny here. And that's what I see this as. We're in charge of our own destiny. I know that communication piece is rough. It's been that way. There's no better way. I mean, how do you inform the board and give them the information they need and then you're going to have board members that say, well, I already heard it from the teachers because you told them first. And then the teachers say, well, we already heard it from the community because you told somebody else first. So that's just an ongoing struggle. But I hope that we make sure that going forward, the communication with those teachers is that it is, I mean, those hardworking, dedicated teachers that have hung in there at Lakeview, being labeled a not successful school, not having any kind of recognition, whether it's on a test or whether it's in their salary, that we really make sure that we work together going forward, because we don't want one of those teachers to leave Lakeview. And you know, as Dr. Royster said, we're not forcing them to stay. We don't want them, if they decide that after all the decisions made, I'm not going to stay at Lakeview, we don't want them to leave this district especially, but hopefully they'll stay at Lakeview and see that they're going to be a part of such a great change that they're going to be able to not only be recognized for what they're doing in their classroom, but they're going to be a part of a history-making model for this state and for this nation. So I'm very excited about this. I am, you know, it is radical change, but we asked for it. We've got it now, and it's time for us to step up to the plate and, you know, and stay advised and informed on this, and make sure that we do our part to make it successful. So be careful. Let this be an example. Be careful what you ask for, because you just might get it. And we ask for success, and I think that this is gonna bring us that success that we ask for. Thank you, Dr. Royster, and your staff.
Thank you. Ms. Leventis Wells.
Thank you, Ms. Doolin. You're going to have to extend. Please.
Okay, can we go ahead and extend for 15 more minutes, please?
I think this process could have gone a little smoother if the delivery was done properly at Lakeview. But with that being said, something that is very concerning to me that has been said here over and over is if any of these teachers at Lakeview are first-year teachers, the message we have sent them is you're not going to get hired because you don't have the experience. And I totally disagree with that. I totally disagree with that. Because you might have an exceptional first-year teacher that is great and loves that school. But we have just destroyed that vision for that particular teacher. Because all I've heard is we want experienced teachers. Well, I got news for you. We've got experienced teachers that aren't that good. Or we've got experienced teachers that are ready to retire. So my next question is, who will be the ones involved in interviewing these teachers at Lakeview? That's what I want to know, Dr. Royster.
Let me respond to your first question. So maybe we didn't clearly communicate this.
It didn't come across.
Because what you took from it's not what was intended. We have many outstanding. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm looking at my counterpart over there, and I think we interpreted it the same way, but go ahead.
Well, to clarify it for both of you then.
Okay.
What you took from it is not what was intended.
Good.
We have many fine first-year teachers in this district. But the point is we have an overabundance of first-year teachers, alternatively certified teachers, and actually foreign teachers in both of these schools. Disproportionate to the ratio of experience versus inexperience that we hire throughout the district. In fact, I believe we gave you those percentages. Last year or two, we hire about 70% experienced teachers in our teacher vacancies. Last year at Lakeview, they hired 50%. If you're currently a first-year teacher with us, as you go through this process, we know what you're able to do. You've been observed. You've been working in our schools. At the point we make those decisions, you'll have been there approximately 6 months. So you will have a track record. No one at any time said, nor should it have been implied by anything we did say, that we're going to go in there and remove every first-year teacher at Lakeview. All we've said is every teacher at Lakeview should reapply to be considered if they want to be a part of this model. I feel sure that some number of first-year teachers up there and second-year teachers will likely be retained. But until people have expressed an interest, we don't really know what that number might be. But on the whole, what we don't want to replicate is our recent experience where these schools are struggling in comparison to our other schools with hiring experienced quality teachers. And the most important aspect of all the attributes that we're looking for has to do with quality. Now, generally speaking, a first-year teacher has only had about half a year to demonstrate what they can do in a classroom. They had their semester of student teaching. Perhaps that was in a similar setting, in a similar school, perhaps it was not. They do not bring the track record to the table when you're considering employment of teachers that more experienced teachers bring. That's why I believe that most of our principals will choose to hire a majority of experienced teachers. But even the most experienced principals leading the most successful schools will not hire exclusively experienced teachers, because there is also benefit to employing first-year teachers and bringing them along in the culture of your school. But you don't want them to be the dominant number of new teachers that you bring into the building. That's not generally good for building the appropriate academic environment that you need to build within the school. Now, to make the determination as to who will be accepted that applies there, I'll defer that to Mr. McCoy and Ms. Clements. It would not be a sole person's decision, nor based on a sole factor.
The interview process, we intend to first place the leadership of the school and evaluate that process first. Then those leaders would be part of the interview process of interviewing the teachers that are interested in participating in this model. In addition to leadership, it would be a panel of district leaders as well, folks from academics, human resource representation, and other folks throughout the district that would help with interviewing these individuals. A lot of folks that have been in the classroom or administrators themselves to provide that feedback, very similar to our district screening and interview process that we have in place now for a lot of our administrative positions. But it would start with having the leaders placed and then the leaders being part of interviewing the teachers that are interested in participating in the model.
So my question, if the principal is going to have to reapply, if the principal is going to have to reapply for the position, who is going to be on that? You're going to get a whole new group to interview her and go through that process with her as well?
So we would follow our current process for hiring administrators, so assistant superintendent for that school level, district administrative leaders would participate in the interviewing process for the principal position.
And once that, I would think, would she or the principal be the first person hired, or you're going to do the whole, okay. So
yes.
Then, with that being said, then would the principal be involved in the hiring of the employees?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm feeling a little better. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you for the clarification. So, Dr. Royster, we know it's Title I school. We know that there are a lot of different components that enter into Lakeview. And I know we have mental health specialists. I know we have counselors there. I know we have behavior interventionists. Have we thought that maybe adding a part-time additional in some of those areas? Because I know that when there's discipline issues in the classroom and you're trying to address some mental health issues as well, some classrooms may have more than others. And sometimes it could determine the advancement of, it could reflect on test scores, is what I'm saying. So if we took care of the discipline issues in the classroom and teachers were able to really teach the subject matter. And I know good teachers can do both, all three, because I've been there, I've done that. I know you can either do it or you can't. But sometimes looking at a Title I school and where we are and why we've been there for so long, what have been the determining factors? Because we have hired new administrators over the years and et cetera. What are the determining factors that have prevented this success? And address those factors. I know you're thinking it's the teachers, it's the teachers. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm always going to defend teachers and parents and students. I care about them. And I love this district, and I do not want the state to take this school back. But I also want to address the issues that have led us to this point after year after year after year after year. So, can you enlighten me?
I've been in the district since 2005. Consistently since 2005. Lakeview Middle School, because that's particularly what you're asking about. Not in isolation, but this would apply to some other schools, but consistently from that year to date, they have had more personnel to address all those things you just mentioned than other schools of a similar size. We've had behavioral people in there. We've had teacher coaches in there. We've had instructional specialists from the state in there. We have had all kinds of additional personnel. We've tried all of that. They currently have significant additional personnel. Mental health professionals are assigned based on acuity, i.e. the number of students needing those services. That's how they're assigned. We've made several comments about discipline. The only way we have to track discipline is to attract the disciplinary referrals within a school. So we'll send you the disciplinary referrals, all the board members, for that middle school and all the others. And you can look and see how many discipline referrals they have during the course of a year. Remembering that they have some behavioral specialists in that school, and they have one full-time additional assistant principal that other schools do not have to handle those things. They certainly do have some disciplinary issues, but their disciplinary issues are not so outrageously disproportionate to other schools that that is the determining factor. One of the huge determining factors that we believe has contributed to the lack of success there is the lack of engagement students in the classroom. That goes directly to discipline. That goes directly to academic attainment. That goes to all measures of student success, is that they are not actively, positively engaged the way they should be. So we've tried all these other supplements. We've tried all these other additional personnel. What we have not done to this point is provide additional incentive to attract the best candidates we can find into that school, and to keep the teachers that are doing a good job with the students in that school. They don't have a very good retention rate, so they get perhaps good teachers that then leave the school. There's nothing that builds a culture of success more so than a culture of success. That's what attracts successful individuals. They want to be a part of something that's successful. So we have an opportunity here to create some incentive to get you to come and let you be a part of making this a model for what can be done with the part over which we have control. We cannot control what they go home to every day. We cannot control what happened before they came to us in school. We cannot control, there's so many facets of a student's life we cannot control. But what we can control is what we do from the time they get there till the time they leave. And everything that we do is very people intensive. So it stands to reason the best quality people we can get should be able to do the best quality job that we could possibly do for these students. We've literally tried all these other things, and we've been trying them for years, and they are not, for whatever reason, producing the results they need to produce.
Thank you, Dr. Royster. Let me see if I have anything else. If we could just, disruption in children's lives can be very impactful. And I think the way we pursue and go about is very important when we move forward. But I'm just interested to finding out what I requested as far as how many people have been sent to that school, how many children have moved from one Title I to this one over the last 5 years. I'd also like to know, over the last 7 years, how many administrators and instructional coaches have come and gone, because we do need stability. But I also want to ask you, is it just a 2-year contract they sign if they are hired, or is it a 3-year?
But we don't have multi-year contracts for anyone. What we've committed to, and we'll give them a letter, that commitment being we'll pay them this amount above for the period of time they're there, not to exceed 4 years, because it's only funded for 4 years.
Okay.
Only teachers in South Carolina, once they receive continuing contract status, they then have the expectation of a contract from then on, unless we go through the statutory requirements of the Fair Employment and Dismissal Act to remove that contract from them. An administrator operates under the same year-to-year contract, but we only have a legal obligation for their salary for the year they're in, and depending on the time of year we would notify them of a change in that for the next year.
Great, because I think there may have been a misinterpretation of what was discussed. I think some of the people thought once they signed that 3-year commitment, they had to stay there no matter what, but that's not necessarily true. Is that correct?
No, they get a letter of agreement so that they are assured that they would receive the additional compensation for the period of time they're there. Because on the other hand, should they not evidence being a fit for that program, they may choose not to be there, or we may choose for them not to be there, so we don't need to have an obligation to continue to pay them at that level.
Okay, I got you. All right, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell.
Thank you. I spoke early on, and then I had some questions. And Dr. Royster will remember me having conversations with him about, I say, you can move anybody in this district. Why don't you move some of these high-flying people over to these type schools? We've had that conversation often, but I'm so glad that we are getting ready to do this type model. But I wanted to ask you, Dr. Royster, on that, the Title I funds, is that that other schools' allocations that would be going into this, or will it just be taken from the overall budget, the overall Title I budget here, so that it decrease funding that'll be going to the other Title I schools?
It will not decrease individual school Title I allocations. It's coming off their individual school Title I allocation, and I think there was a few dollars coming off a district set aside, which is not money that goes directly to those schools.
So Lakeview get $3 million in Title I funds?
Well, this is over 4 years.
Oh, okay.
That's the 4-year total from both schools.
Okay.
We can send you all a breakdown by year. That's simply the total from both sources for all 4 years.
So that's just their allocation.
That's just their allocation. And I think there's a few dollars from what's called Title I set aside for the district level, but that doesn't impact the allocation going to, say, Cherrydale or some other Title I school.
And since you mentioned Cherrydale, when I was at Cherrydale, and our Cherrydale kids feed into Lakeview. And we took Cherrydale from being a failing school to an exemplary school because of the environment that we created.
It is currently one of the higher performing Title I schools in the district, and a high performing school.
They've continued to improve, yes.
You wanna?
Yep, excuse me, can we extend for 15 more minutes if no one objects? Thank you.
And I was writing down when everybody was talking, and I started remembering about when the state came in and took over Hollis and the structure that they had to go by. Like they had to have documentation of every 15 minutes. I think it's probably some people in here that remember that whenever they came in to do that at Hollis. You remember, Debbie? And you know, we don't want the state to come in here, because when the state took over Allendale, they gave it back because they couldn't do a better job than what Allendale was doing. And I'm sure a lot of y'all remember that too. So yeah, but change is hard, especially for educators. We know it's really hard. For the teachers, being in the school system is very hard, but we got to do something different. We have got to do something different to get that school to moving. And I'm so glad that we are finally gonna put something in place for those kids and those teachers and the staff up there to see that they have not been forgotten. That they have not been forgotten. So I commend you on that, but I wanted to ask Dr. McQuarrie one question. You talked about the gains versus this model. Should we be doing look at gains instead of what they have in place? What they're going to have in place for this model?
I wouldn't suggest looking at gains, because if you look at gains currently in mathematics, Lakeview is showing 9% of their students meeting and exceeding expectations, again, in math, whereas the state average is 33% and the district average is 40%. To make the kind of gain needed to get to that level is just exceedingly difficult. However, while it's difficult, it's much more attainable and a much better expectation to set, that individual students grow from where they are to above that point based on their peers.
What, the model is more advantageous than looking at gains? Because when you were talking about it and you said that, you know, I'm looking at, if they coming from it used to be, not meets, 1, 2.
Right.
They were the lowest, and they got up to a 2. That was a gain, but the teachers are not gonna see any kind of incentive because they moved the kids up. So with this, they're not gonna be seeing any kind of incentive from moving them up unless they reach what level we're talking about for them to get, right?
Well, if you're talking
is that
I think you're correct if you're talking about gains, if you're discussing gains, and there's a couple of points to this. One is principals and teachers still have gain goals as part of their annual targets, annual goal setting process. So they're still looking, as Dr. Royster said, to go from where they are to where they want to be. And that's annually a discussion with administrators and teachers to set their goal. Same thing with the assistant superintendents of the schools at various levels. They have annual discussions and periodic within a year discussions about the goal setting process for that school. So those gain goals are already integral and part of processes within the district. The model that we're talking about is a model I think that's much more appropriate for determining teacher impact because it standardizes I talked about and used the anomaly of race beforehand. If you happen to be, if you can finish a 5K in 15 minutes, then you're going to be compared to other students whose typical time in the past has been a 5K that's set at 15 minutes. If you happen to be in I think it's called a recumbent cycle, but you finish a 5K in a cycling machine, then you're going to be compared to those folks. If you're just starting out in a 5K, and you might have been sitting on the couch for a while, and all of that's new to you, you're not experienced, your body's not in shape for it, you don't have a good coach, or you have a great coach, but you just don't have the experience of what to do or how to attack a hill or something like that, then you may be sitting at 26 minutes for that 5K, which is commendable, but you're looking at being compared to people who are starting out at that particular point. And so that is, in my opinion, a much more fair look at a student's growth. And that growth isn't necessarily precipitated by a particular gain score. Again, it's based on how every other student who scored similarly the prior year moved. And so it's a much more fair comparison than comparing a student in the 3rd grade at Alexander Elementary in mathematics to the typical 3rd grade student at the state or the district, which is much more difficult.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. McQuarrie. Jeff, I wanted to ask you, with the PD, are we scheduling anything like we used to have Ruby Payne teaching students of poverty? Are we going to have any kind of PD like that for the staff at the school?
There would certainly be, once the staff is hired, looking at that overall, who's making up that staff. Certainly there might be some pieces we do of that. If to Ms. Mosley's point, if we have quite a few teachers who are coming from schools that are not high poverty, then certainly we may need to do some, and it may not be something we do with everybody. We're trying to be very specific with PD now, that's down to the who needs what versus making people sit through stuff they already know. So yes, anything like that, strategies, I mean, there's a lot that once we hire staff and figure out their backgrounds, we'll have a better idea of exactly what that needs to include, other than what stuff we know we need to do, like the lesson development and that kind of stuff.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Doolin. Thank you.
Dr. Presley.
I think I'm standing between us and whatever is to come next, so I'll try to make this really quick. Y'all, I've been listening all morning about all the things that we agree about. Every single person in this room agrees that students deserve the very, very best. Every single person believes that something must be done. Every single person believes that it should be innovative, it should be cutting edge, and we all know that the research bears out that a highly qualified teacher is the number one key to student success. We all know that. I'm speaking from a position of you, I don't know because I haven't done a poll around this dais, but I'm probably in the top, whatever percentage of people who are 100% pro school transformation models. I believe in the words that are below there: culture, achievement, performance, and pay. I believe in those models. I'm speaking from a former Beaufort County district lead where I oversaw the implementation of the TAP model in every school north of the Broad and one south of the Broad. I saw its flaws and I saw its perks. I saw all of the things that worked and did not work, and I see a lot of that intentionality in this. My questions and the granularity of what I asked earlier is because of the fact that I see an absolute necessity for weeds to be in the weeds, because the other thing that I believe is those students out there, we need to be in the weeds now. So my questioning about those internal structures, and I'll stand by that, we need to see more of what that's going to look like throughout the year, not just at the beginning of the year, throughout the year. What does that internal structure look like? And we need some specificity around that prior to hiring these teachers, because that should inform some of the questions that we're asking them. You won't find a bigger fan. I absolutely commend Dr. Royster, his staff, what you guys have done thus far. I just feel like there's some gaps that need to be filled in before we proceed. That's all. The research piece, some more granularity over those internal structures, what will happen in the school to support the teachers, and that ties to that culture, y'all. And it's easy to say, attract and retain, but how do you retain them? And it's not just with the money. So I will close by saying I'm in this 100% with you guys. I think that this is the pathway forward. I think that there are a couple of gaps that we need to attend to and we need to fill in before we proceed. Thank you.
And Dr. Prescott, I do need to address a piece of that the weeds. I don't want to give off the impression that we have not planned this out from start to finish and down into the weeds. We have not presented into the weeds today because that wasn't necessarily the purpose of today. A lot of what we already do successfully will be carried and continued into this model. We have doubled down on our support the last 6 or 8, however long we've been in school, at Lakeview and Alexander. That focus model that you guys see every year that has become partly a national model. We have people from all over the country that come and see that model because we have had huge success with it. Those components of that focus school model work very well. And we've been doubling down on that. Dr. McDavid's led that from the academics team at Alexander, Dr. McDavid from Lakeview, and Alexander with Dr. Stevens. And we've already seen some improvement, and this first benchmark this month is going to mark that exactly how far we've come with that. So those structures and those procedures, I guess the good news there is we're not starting from scratch with that because we know what has worked in the focus school models. The biggest barrier, those things that we've talked about in the past, is that we don't always have enough coaches to deploy to support the teachers. In some cases, even our international teachers who are experienced teachers in most cases that come to those who mention the discipline, our culture is very different. And their eyes are open sometimes when they walk into our classroom and they don't realize that it's not the exact same culture as in India or France or Spain that they came from. And we can easily, a coach can easily spend 5, 6, 8 hours a week with a teacher like that. And when you multiply that multiple times, it's overwhelming when you don't have a good mix of experience versus inexperience. Some of the gate teachers we have over there are phenomenal as around the district. Same with international teachers. I could take you to an international teacher classroom right now that is absolutely phenomenal. So it's not that those folks can't be and won't be successful. It's just our resources that we're pouring into the large number of inexperienced teachers. It's hugely resource intensive. And that's been the difference when we looked at why does this model work at Cherrydale, as Ms. Goodwin-Kyle just mentioned. Cherrydale has been very successful with this model, and others, it's just when you look at how much we're trying to support there and the number of resources we can't send in. So I don't want to imply that we have not planned this down to the ground. You know me, you know my staff. We have planned this from start to finish, and we've taken those models. The other part of that, though, is we do want to make sure when we get, I hope, again, that there's going to be people at Lakeview that apply and Alexander that apply. When we build a faculty council at that school, we want those champions at that school, those teacher champions like all schools have, to help drive this. I mean, part of that's going to be sitting there and say, you've been at Lakeview, you've been at Alexander, what's the issues? What do we need to do driving forward? So while we've planned out as much as we can, I feel like on that front, there is some pieces that are going to have to be planned out once we get a stable faculty on board, and hopefully, again, some experience of those two schools who are committed, say, I believe in Lakeview or I believe in Alexander, we can do this. And then we sit down with those faculties and plan, okay, how are we going to do this alongside of them, not to them, but alongside to do that with them.
Mr. McCoy, I did not mean that you were implying that the weeds weren't necessary at all. Thank you.
Thanks. I think we only have 2 more speakers. How much time do we have left?
1 minute. Mine's going to take 1 minute. I just need to add to my list for Dr. Burke.
Let's extend for 6 minutes, please. No more.
Ready? Okay. Also to the list, I'd like to know how many ESOL positions are there, and are they filled? Mental health positions, I mentioned that. How many are there, and are they filled? Behavior interventionists, how many are there, and are they filled? And that's all I have. That was less than a minute. Thank you.
I have some questions if everyone else is done. Does anyone know the current percent of students that are English language learners at Alexander and Lakeview?
I need to look it up. It's over 50 because part of your board approval last year was supporting more heavily those schools over 50%.
I recall what Jeff references in the budget. You all approved additional general fund money, where if a ML population is 50% or greater, they get a greater number of ML resources in that school. So they will have more by virtue of being over 50%. And I believe that's both of those schools.
I had to check.
We'll send you the exact percent. Excuse me.
We'll have to check that.
Is there a way to know how many of those 50 to 62% have been in the country for only 2 to 3 years?
We have, yes, our ELL office has all that data and including their access levels. That actually was, I don't have that presentation on this computer. That was part of the presentation we did last spring for you. We had broken that out by access level. We'd have to pull the new data for this year, but we do track all of that.
Their access level, that's more telling than how long they've been here. That basically quantifies them on their command of English.
Well, could it be beneficial to, I don't know if we can just let the State Department know, but can we ask for an additional waiver for those students to give them a little bit more grace?
They have 2 years technically. Are you talking about state assessment? Yeah, so they have 2 years on the state assessment based on when they get here and all of that. So while it is reported in the data we get in the summertime, they still take the test and we still get that data. But the report card data that's coming out today, that has all been adjusted for the students who have not been here for those 2 years.
But
yes.
Based on the scores, do you feel like it's a fair test to give them even after 2 years?
I think it depends on where their level is. Certainly I think the level is more indicative of, that's the whole point of those access levels 1 through 5. 1 and 2 is still learning and not strong command yet. Level 3 is going to be more of a, can converse and can speak and can, challenge. 4 and 5, of course, they're good. So, in a perfect world, do I believe that, if you're on a level 1 or 2, should you have to take the test into account? Probably not. But that's a federal accountability piece, not state. I'm pretty sure that's federal, is it not, Jason? Yes, that's federal.
Could we ask that part of our plan to avoid state takeover be that we ask whoever we need to ask on the federal level that we have an extra year for those students?
So from my understanding, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, we as a district cannot ask a waiver for the federal government. The state can. So the state actually has several waivers out there right now, not for that, but for some science and social studies testing and how we calculate grad rate for high school students, or how we calculate grad rate. We as a district, though, from my understanding, is we cannot ask for a federal waiver. That has to be the state asking for the federal waiver. Now, we could petition the state, I guess, to say, we'd like this to be, waived, but they would have to ask for the waiver.
Maybe we can look into asking the state to ask. Can y'all talk just for a minute about what a state takeover is?
If there's still anybody here that was here when they referenced Hollis earlier, that was a long time ago. The model now would look different. We don't know because they haven't taken one over yet. They have taken over districts. When they take over a district, they basically render the elected board inoperable. They put a superintendent in place that reports to the state superintendent of education. So I would imagine that what a state takeover would look like is they will put a principal in that school, and that principal will report to the State Department of Education. Whether they report to the state superintendent or to some other higher level State Department official, I don't know. But no matter what it looks like, it's not something we want. We don't want somebody coming in here to do something that we should do ourselves. Those students deserve for us to fix and address this issue. I'm fully confident we have people in this district that can do that. There are people inside those two buildings that can contribute to doing that. We don't need them to bring somebody in from the state. They've put people in here from the state at multiple schools over the years. In fact, going back to one of my first years here, there were at Lakeview and some other schools, multiple people employed by the state to provide consulting services, input, instructional improvement strategies. That didn't work either. So what precisely it will look like, we don't know, because no school has yet been taken over under the new rules for taking over a school or a district. Districts have been taken over, but not individual schools, to my knowledge.
This would be
unless you know of one, Jason.
2025 would be, because we had the COVID disruption, you're taken over after 2 cycles or 6 years of CSI status. We had 2 years, I believe, in there that disrupted, so technically now we're on like year 8. So schools like Lakeview and the state were already on, they were first cycle identified, now they're second cycle. Those are the first schools in the state that would be eligible in 2025. So it just hasn't been done before.
So there are others in that same status, but no one has yet been taken over.
My last question is, Nancy, just give me one more minute. Please, without no one object. If this costs just over $1 million a year for our fund balance, right? Can you tell us what the lowest balance of the fund balance has been in the last 3 years?
Stat can tell you that, and we're about to significantly add to that fund balance when the auditors finish their work, but she can tell you what the current one is.
Even just a ballpark.
So as of May, because we're still closing out June, we were at 19%, unassigned fund balance at 19% of the FY23 budget.
Well, how much is that in dollars?
I can tell you.
approximately 203, well, you gotta take 60, hold on just a second.
Well, in ballparking it, it's around.
It's about 145 million.
145 million?
Mm-hmm.
And we need just over $1 million to implement this program. Okay, that was my last question.
Just to make sure we're clear, we would ask you set aside the 4.5 all at one time, and it would sit in designated fund balance for the 4 years.
Yes, but it would only be spent a little over $1 million a year. Right.
If that much.
I would like to. Just a minute.
We can come back to you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to make the motion, so we'll go to Ms. Presley first, or Dr. Presley first.
Oh, okay. Dr. Presley?
Is there a possibility that the questions that have been put forward today could be answered and some of the gaps closed, and we could revisit this at the nearest point in the future? Is that a possibility? And I guess help me, Mr. Webb. I know you're going to have to guide me on that one.
I move to table this vote until our next board meeting.
I think we need to have a motion made before a motion to table can be made.
Is that right?
Maybe. Mr. Webb?
That's correct. Needs to be a motion before the next.
I would like to make the motion.
Dr. Stiles will make a motion.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make the motion to approve the Elevate Employee Incentive Model concept and to designate 4.5 million from the general fund balance to provide the difference in compensation and bonus outside the Title I allocation for that purpose for the 4-year pilot program.
Second. I motion to table this vote until our next board meeting and the questions are answered that we put forth today. Is there a
second?
I might a point of clarification. All you do today, if you vote to support this, is move the vote to the regular board meeting at the end of the month, if that helps to clarify.
If this is tabled, does it come off the table at the next 7 p.m. board meeting, or does it come off the table at the next CAL?
So Dr. Royster is correct that if this were to be voted today and sent to the Board of Trustees in 2 weeks, that there would be a time for the administration to answer some of the questions that have been posed. So that's one option that the board has. The second option is to postpone this topic for a definite period of time as compared to tabling it. Tabling it, technically you need a motion to take it from the table. Again, it gets complicated. It's not the preferred method under Robert's rules. So if there's a specified time that the board is looking at, I would recommend that being put into the actual motion of when it should be considered next. But to Dr. Royster's point on option number 1 or A, however you want to look at it, and the board has done this in the past, if there are questions, we have 2 weeks to answer that prior to consideration at the next board meeting. That's just an option that you have.
So, Doug, what you're, Mr. Webb?
Actually, I'm sorry. I think once there's a motion to table, there can be no more discussion.
Just clarification purposes.
Clarification. So we would actually, if we got the information, then it would go to vote at our board meeting? Or would it go to the next committee of the whole?
So if you were to vote today in the affirmative to pass it to the Board of Trustees meeting in 2 weeks, then, and Dr. Royster can certainly weigh in on this, in the next few days, week or so, I would expect the administration to provide information for you to respond to those questions. At the board meeting in 2 weeks, the board would still have the option to postpone the vote, move it to next month or something of that degree. So what you would, one option would be is to provide the flexibility and time over the next 2 weeks for the administration to respond to some of the questions. And then in 2 weeks at the nighttime board meeting, the board can decide what to do at that point. That would be one option.
We need to vote on the issue of being tabled.
Yeah,
first.
that you have
Or
a
do I
motion, I
withdraw
believe it was
that?
seconded.
Right, it
So-
was seconded.
That's right. So there would need to be a vote on that.
So all those in favor of tabling, please say aye.
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 I'm gonna need a show of hands because I can't tell. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Motion does not pass. That is a tie, correct?
That's
So motion
correct.
fails. So Dr. Stiles's motion stands unless someone wants to motion to postpone. Were you going to motion to postpone?
Make a motion to postpone.
I
Oh,
move to
and Presley.
postpone until the next Cal meeting to revisit.
Second.
Until,
Right, the motion is to postpone the vote until the next Cal meeting?
Mr. Webb, you said we could have a specific amount of time, correct?
That is correct.
So my, and this for clarification, my why with that would give the administration and all of the folks time to fill in the gaps. I'm assuming for us to have additional questions based on what is shared. I'm just trying to give us enough time to do everything that we would need to do in between now and when we vote on this without holding up the progress.
The motion is to postpone until the next Cal meeting. All those in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Bush.
I just want to.
And just to clarify, that motion, unlike a motion to table, is debatable.
It's debatable, right?
Yeah, so there could be discussion on that.
All right, I just want to hear from the administration. That would essentially give us 2 more. The process right now is on this. If we vote yes, it would be postponed actually 6 weeks, because it would be the next Cal, and then we would, and then if a vote were taken in the affirmative, then it would be 2 more weeks till the next board meeting. So that would actually put the approval 6 weeks. If we vote this motion down and give the administration the 2 weeks, in 2 weeks it would come back. It would come to the board meeting, and then if there were still questions, we could extend it 2 more weeks. We could refer it to the Cal, right?
That is correct.
So we could still go that process, because it might generate some more questions that people need to have a comfort level on. But it would give us a little bit, I believe, a little bit more flexibility. I would like to hear from Dr. Royster. With that timeline, with that 6-week timeline or 2-week timeline, is that in any way, I mean, is that something the administration would feel more comfortable with? Or is that something that, I don't want y'all to be pushed in 2 weeks, because there were a lot of questions here this morning. And I don't want y'all to be pushed. So I could support the 4 weeks, but I want to make sure that we're not setting a path for failure here. And I don't know, as far as timeline, what do we need to be able to start the process of this?
If I recall all the questions that were asked correctly, the one that has the lengthiest response was Dr. Presley's question about the research, which that's already in a packet. It's
Nancy, yeah, we'll send it out.
got that ready to send out today. We can attach some narrative to further clarify what Mr. McCoy said in response to Dr. Presley's questions about what does staff development look like. Obviously, some of which would be determined when you get the people in there. Because as we all know, some of that would be driven by what does the faculty ultimately look like? What experiences do they bring? What areas do they have of strength? What areas do they have where they need additional work? So some of that would actually take place as we go. Almost all the rest of the questions that I recall being asked were having to do with how many additional personnel do we have in those two schools and what type of personnel they are, and what's the transiency in and out of those schools. And I think from a context standpoint, we'd give you the transiency in and out of all the Title I elementary and middle schools. Unless I missed something, that was the gist of the questions that we were asked. The others we answered in here, so unless I missed something, you can clarify that with Nancy before we leave. I see no issue with getting the answers to those by the end of this week. Would that be a problem?
Yes, sir.
So you should have them within 2 weeks, giving you a week of that time to review those answers. If you defer it to the Committee of the Whole in November, to your point, Ms. Bush, 6 weeks, but to put that on a date, that's the end of November. One of the reasons we brought it in October, we weren't quite ready to bring it in September, but to get much later than that, certainly we could work with the end of November. But this is a tremendous amount of movement that needs to take place, and we need to prioritize to whatever extent we restaff those two schools. We need to do that before we begin other staff movement in other schools in the district, so that we ensure we have those individuals placed and that we have moved the ones that would move from other schools so that during the regular staffing process, they can be moved. So again, we certainly can work with the end of November. If we get beyond that, we would probably say we need to defer this another year. And that's one more year towards that deadline. More importantly, one more year towards us doing a better job for our students there. Because while we have talked about that to a degree today, almost everything else had to do with the adults in the building, not so much with the students. And that's what we want to make sure we're focused on, that we can do the best job we can possibly do for them, and we've exhausted every possibility of that. Hopefully that answered your question, Ms. Bush.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or discussion?
Part of that suggestion was to give the administration as much time as they needed for that. So if the turnaround that Dr. Royster is describing is doable, then I'm fine with getting that prior to the board meeting, the regular board meeting.
Well, there's still a motion on the floor to postpone, so we need to vote for that.
Still, yes, just needs to be a vote, and then depending on the vote, then we can take next steps.
So the current motion is to postpone until the next CAL?
That is correct.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Are you?
No.
The motion is to postpone until the next CAL.
So just as a point of clarification, if you're in support of the motion, then this topic would be discussed at the next Committee of the Whole in November. If you are opposed to this motion, then it's lined up to potentially go to the October board meeting in 2 weeks.
So those in favor of postponing to the CAL, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed to postponing to the CAL, please say no.
No.
Okay, the noes have it. Dr. Stiles' motion stands, and there is a second. Is there any more discussion? all those in favor, please say aye to Dr. Stiles's original motion to approve the Elevate program. Those in favor, is there discussion? Oh, sorry. You'd like a roll call vote? Oh, will someone call a roll call vote for us?
May I ask for a point of clarification before we?
Yes.
I just want to make sure that voting in favor of this only ensures that we will be provided all of the information. There will be another opportunity to vote, or that will be the final opportunity at the board meeting, correct, Mr. Webb?
That is correct.
Thank you very much.
Only the formal action must occur at the nighttime board meeting.
Gotcha.
Mrs. Bush? Yes. I don't have my regular list, just a second. Let me back up. Ms. Brett?
Yes.
Ms. Bush? Yes. Mr. Cochran?
Yes.
Ms. Doolan?
Yes.
Ms. Goodwin Caldwell? Yes. Ms. Levin as well? No. Ms. Middleton?
Yes.
Ms. Morrison Fair? Yes. Ms. Mosley?
Yes.
Dr. Presley?
Yes.
Dr. Stiles? Yes. 10-1.
Thank you. That concludes section 4.02. We are moving on to section 4.03, First Steps Board nomination. Dr. Royster, did you want to speak to this?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. We have traditionally had an appointee from the school district that serves on the First Steps Board. Prior to a change in the legislation, that was simply an appointee from the administration. There was actually a change in that authorizing law this past year, which requires that an employee of the school district be appointed, and I believe it's quoted there, each public school district board located within a particular First Steps partnership coverage area shall appoint one of its employees to serve as a member of the local First Steps partnership. So the only difference here is you all need to make that appointment rather than the administration. We have recommended for your consideration that Dr. Susan Stevens continue to serve as the appointee from the school district on the First Steps Board. As you probably know, her current assignment, she deals with elementary and early childhood educational programming within the Division of Academics. But prior to that, she directly supervised all the pre-K programs in the district, and she has also served as an elementary principal. So it is our recommendation that she be appointed to serve another term as the Greenville County Schools employee representative on the Greenville First Steps Board of Directors. Thank you.
I need a maker.
Ms. Doolan, I would like to be the maker of the motion to appoint Dr. Susan Stevens to represent Greenville County Schools on the Greenville First Steps Board of Directors.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. That concludes the administration portion of this meeting.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Doolan. We appreciate your time. That was a long committee today, a long section today. You did a great job. Our fifth item of business is building and grounds. Ms. Middleton will serve as the chair. Ms. Middleton, I'll turn this section over to you.
I'm trying not to make this so long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, our first matter of business is item 5.01, Facilities Project Report. Item is for information only. Dr. Royster, would you like to speak to this item?
No, ma'am, we'll be glad to answer any question you might have. Either I'll answer or Colonel Carlin will answer. I don't think there's anything of particular note to draw your attention to. No additional projects put on it, or no particular delays or unusual occurrences to report.
Okay, hearing none, then we'll move to the second order of business. This will be 5.2. Commissioners of Public Works easement at the new elementary school on the old J.L. Mann High School site. Dr. Royster, would you like to speak on this?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. Just briefly, this is simply the water line access for the new elementary school on the old J.L. Mann site. And you will see in your board docs as attached the actual deed of right-of-way to provide right-of-way to the Public Works Commission to provide that water service. And you'll see a plat drawing that indicates the location of that right-of-way and subsequent water line. And we need that both for the construction and for the occupancy of the new building. Be glad to answer any question you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Royster. We have a recommended motion from the administration to approve a water line easement as requested by the Commissioner of Public Works at the new elementary school on the old J.L. Mann High School site. I need a maker for the motion.
Motion to approve water line easement as requested by the Commissioner of Public Works at the old J.L. Mann site.
Okay, thank you. All in favor, hearing none, no questions. Is there any questions? No, okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Our third matter of business is Building and Grounds, 5.03, Upstate Greenways and Trails Alliance, permanent and perpetual easement and right-of-way request at Bryson Elementary School. Dr. Royster, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, ma'am. Item 503, which is similar to item 504, just two different locations. The first one is at Bryson Elementary School, is to provide an easement to the Upstate Greenways and Trails Alliance, basically to continue their bicycle and walking trail. I think the ultimate goal of both of these is to connect back to the Swamp Rabbit Trail. And I think they envision that that would go from all the way down south of Fountain Inn, all the way to Travelers Rest or north. This is very similar to other easements that you all have approved. In fact, I believe there are some photographs that show some samples of where this has occurred at other locations. We have granted several of these over the years. We require various fencing for them, various approaches that we will be willing to approve or wouldn't be willing to approve. We have had to date no issue with any of these easements that we have granted. And should we have, I believe they are worded in such a way that we can end that easement should we choose to do so based on having any sort of legitimate concerns about it. Again, we have quite a few in place and have had no issue with that. We locate them as far to the edge of our property as we can possibly locate, and we provide fencing, or we require the easement, the people to whom we grant the easement, to provide fencing. In some cases where it is an open area that is currently open and there's already a public sidewalk, for example, across the front of a building, we may not require additional fencing because you already have a public sidewalk there.
Thank you, Dr. Royster. This item has a recommended motion from administration to approve Upstate Greenways and Trails Alliance's permanent and perpetual easement and right-of-way request at Bryson Elementary School. Can I have someone make a motion on that? Dr. Stiles?
Yes, thank you. I would like to make the motion to approve the Upstate Greenways and Trails Alliance permanent and perpetual easement and right-of-way request at Bryson Elementary School.
Second.
Do we have a second?
A second.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Dr. Royster, if I understand you correctly, based on our past experiences with these easements, we don't have any student safety concerns at all with this?
We have no issue that's been brought to my attention over any of these at any point.
The only other question I had, I noticed on the Bryson Elementary picture of the proposed fencing that a small section of it would be a 6-foot fence, but the largest section would be a 4-foot fence. I'm just wondering about, I guess basically why the 4-foot fence as opposed to 6?
Colonel Carlin can probably speak directly to that, but that is adjacent to an existing public approach. And I think I'll let you speak directly to the difference in height requirement. We have some concerns about supervision for the 6-foot part.
Yes, sir. The reason we're asking the UGATA to replace this fence with a 4-foot fence, that's what exists out there now. We're basically repositioning it. We require the 6-foot fence in particular around the sides of the property and the back of the property where it's kind of out of sight or, you know, not very public. I think a 6-foot fence at the very front of the school would look very industrial is probably the term.
Thank you. That's all, Ms.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cochran. Is there any other questions? Okay. I need someone to make a motion on that. Oh, Dr. Stiles? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, all in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, fourth and final order of business is in Building and Grounds is Upstate Greenways and Trails Alliance permanent and perpetual easement and right-of-way request at Fountain Inn High School. Dr. Royster, would you like to talk about this?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. This is the exactly same request. Fountain Inn High School, different property. Same information is attached, showing a layout of the proposed route, along with the fencing that we're requiring to be provided by the group requesting the grant, and pretty much the same basic pictures are attached to it from our other easements at other school locations. This runs basically the perimeter of the back of the property, the side of the property, and along the front. There is some existing fence. It's maybe a little bit more difficult to see on the electronic version. I believe it's blue, and your proposed new fencing is red, which makes it a lot easier to see. But it's 6 feet across the perimeter of the property there, and also has the removal of some fence because it's being replaced by fencing closer to the road.
Thank you, Dr. Royster. This item has a recommended motion from administration to approve Upstate Greenways and Trails Alliance's permanent and perpetual easement and right-of-way request at Fountain Inn High School. I believe that Ms. Dillon will make a motion on that.
A motion to approve Upstate Greenways and Trails Alliance's permanent and perpetual easement and right-of-way request at Fountain Inn High School.
Thank you. I need a second.
Second.
Any other questions? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Nay. The motion carries. This concludes the buildings and grounds sections, and I'll turn the meeting back over to Dr. Stiles.
Thank you so much for chairing that, Ms. Middleton. This concludes our agenda today. It's 12:52. I need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Mrs. Doolan's made the motion. I have a second from Mrs. Goodwin Caldwell. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The motion carries.